What's up, meta nerds? This video is going to be a complete breakdown of the watery world of Mon Cala, also known as Dak. This planet has a ton of awesome details in both canon and legends, many of which are the same, but when they're exclusive I will have a canon or legend sign on the screen if you care about that distinction. This is one of the most fascinating planets in the galaxy, with some of the strangest plant and animal life, really weird locations, and a deep and rich history. So let's jump into it. We should point out that the Quarren in their Quarrenese language, and in the eponymous Mon Calamari language, both refer to this planet as Dak. But the Mon Calamari were a more technologically advanced species than the Quarren, having already spread out and studied a few of their nearest celestial bodies by the time the human representatives of the Republic made first contact. That was way back in the year 4166 BBY. Because these were the people they met with, the planet was named after them in the Republic's database. The name stuck from then on out, but I will use both names throughout the video. This world was located at coordinates U6 on the galactic map, being in the Outer Rim territories in the Calamari sector within the Mon Calamari system, which was a binary star system with 8 orbits. The first planet was Moluxu, a barren, rocky planetoid with no moons. Dak was number 2 with 1 moon that was much like our moon here on Earth. At the third position was the uncreatively named Iceberg 1, which was simply a large ball of ice. But it too had a moon. Fourth orbit was Iceberg 2, followed by Mon Calamari. This world was one of those that the Calamari had discovered and eventually terraformed to act as a colony. That world had 2 moons, while it was followed by the gas giant Sep Elopon and its 32 moons. Not much could be done here except for mine the gases, and it is unknown if any of those moons were ever utilized. And in the last 2 orbits are Iceberg 3 and 4. Though there is constant debate amongst both Republic and Calamari astronomers stating that both of those icebergs should really be considered comets that were just captured by the binary stars. Now that we know about its celestial neighborhood, let's head down to Mon Cala itself. With a diameter of 11,030 kilometers or 6,854 miles, it was just a bit smaller than Earth and more than twice the size of Mustafar. Its rotation period, or day, and orbital period, or year, were also similar to Earth, at 21-hour days and 398 days in a year. The atmosphere was Type 1, which was breathable for most species, and had moderate temperatures as well as standard gravity. Almost the entire surface was covered in water, but there were some locations that poked up above the waves. While the Quarren evolved in the deepest parts of the oceans, the Mon Calamari grew up in the water but would also go up on land. This amphibious nature is what saved the species early on, when the Quarren attacks nearly made the Calamari go extinct. But the ability to regroup and take refuge on these islands, while also use this as a place to manufacture weapons, allowed them to turn the tide of this early tribal warfare, to the point that the Quarrens were the ones that were almost extinct. While these bits of landmass are so few and far between, this advantage set them on course to technological dominance over their underwater neighbors for the rest of history. Eventually these islands would be expanded, along with adding completely artificial island cities. The capital, Mon Cala City, would remain underwater, but there were major sites like Dak City and New Coral City that were above water and acted as major ports. While many, like Bell City, would have major sections both above and below the water, acting like a comfy place to live for the natives, with short transit times to the busy hubs visited by offworlders. Tarkin once said, quote, "Mon Cala is a valuable world in many ways, its people, technology, and civilization. Why, Emperor Palpatine himself enjoys the Mon Calamari aquatic ballet." That was the show going on while Palpatine told Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and there were several of these performing arts centers spread across Mon Cala. The Mon Caladrome was an enormous and incredibly elegant opera house that rose out just above the surface to allow easy access to off-world visitors. While there were also resort cities like those of Crystal Reef, so called because it was situated near the icebergs of the Northern Pole. This playground had numerous gambling facilities, and would end up hosting some criminal organizations like Black Sun. And there were even pod racer courses at Orotoro Ga'am, and at the nearby Grand Reefs. And so there was tons of entertainment both on-world and as cultural exports. But at the end of the day, the major exports were still seafood, and the high-tech equipment for starships and weapons. While the imports were the diverse foods and medicines that could be acquired from a galaxy-spanning economy. Also taking in some valuable tech as well, with things like hyperdrives being the miracle of space travel that opened the world up to endless opportunities. But the Mon Calamari made shields that were considered one of the best credits could buy, so you can see why it was so crucial to the Republic. By the time of the Clone Wars, the population of Dak was 27.5 billion, with 49% Quarren, 46% Mon Calamari, a surprisingly high 4% human, and 1% listed as other. One of the most interesting other were the whalodons. These are a sentient whale-like species that never developed any technology, which could intelligently communicate with others via their sing-song language. Early on in the Mon Calamari rule over this planet, they had outlawed any hunting of the whalodon. But later when the Empire took over, they saw these majestic creatures simply as a great source of protein, setting up processing centers and flying in hordes of Aqualish to hunt them down and chop them up. But their entire history before that was really peaceful, with cities like Aquarius being built so that they could interact with other species, including offworlders. Aquarius being an enormous oxygen bubble dome city, providing for an incredible experience for O2 breathing visitors, who could walk around on the ocean floor without any dive suits, and some would even learn to speak with these enormous intelligent creatures. There was also a ton of other plant and wildlife in this watery world, and this is where things get really weird. I truly believe that Mon Cala has some of the most insane, complex, and just overall interesting life in the entire galaxy. You'll see that a lot of them focus on their telepathic ability. Starting off is the MC80, a simple looking frog that has the interesting ability of mind control, and these things are considered force sensitive. Just think about how many sapient species out there in the galaxy, like humans, only have a tiny fraction of their population that are force sensitive, whereas this entire frog species can use telepathy to control their prey. Studies have shown that they were exclusively utilizing the dark side of the Force. This once became a planet-wide emergency with the boom of off-world trade, as things like rancors were being imported to Dak. The Amphihydrus essentially launched numerous terrorist attacks across major cities, making the rancors and similar large beasts go on killing sprees, to the point that the Empire had to step in and launch a war on these frogs. Try to make them go extinct, but there are still traces of small communities of these dark-sider amphibians across the world. And an interesting thing to consider, though not directly addressed by the lore, is if they can control sapient offworlders. It doesn't seem like the native larger beings like the Quarren, Calamari, or whalodons were ever affected by them, perhaps due to some natural defenses against psychic attacks that we would expect to naturally arrive when you develop on a world with so many telepathic creatures. But most species of offworlders would likely have no defenses, so let me know what you think about this in the comments. Blobfish were more simple creatures that live in the sea trees, and would travel through the kelp forest in swarms of thousands. Their main threat was the blossoming gulper, which had limbs that resembled the sea tree, using these as a lure while it burrowed itself into the sandy sea floor. These sands were also the home to coral worms, which were considered a delicacy by several different species, while cubicle worms were a threat to the pod racers on the Grand Reefs. The Dak anchovy was loved across the galaxy, but some, like the famous chef Dexter Jetster, had a dangerous allergy to these and Mon Calamari. Cowl were crab-like creatures whose shells were so strong that they were used by the Mon Calamari Knights as a shield. The devil squid was one of the most fearsome creatures under the seas, dominating the deepest regions of Dak called the Devil's Crevasse. At around 10 meters or 33 feet, these things were used as war squids by Imperial Knight Tree Sind in 137 ABY. He used the Force to control several of them in his fight against the even more powerful Sea Leviathan, a creature that was not a natural life form native to Dak, but a Sith spawn, an alchemically engineered horror. The Great Ungnis Trench was one of the largest trenches on Mon Cala, and which also housed some of this world's most terrifying creatures, the as yet unnamed giant squid-like monstrosity that once attacked Darth Vader. While the Krakana was like a shark but with numerous spiked appendages, and even more feared than the larger monstrosities just mentioned. Because while you were unlikely to ever encounter one of those giant squids, this creature was known to roam throughout the entire planet, snatching up natives and intensely feared by offworlders. It was related to the larger Keelkana, which were used as mounts by the Calamari Knights. While a type of crustacean called the Titan Cantray was used for its armor, its skin being tough yet pliable to make this protective suit. The Lee Rome was a type of clam that was used to hold the crown of the monarch of the Mon Calamari, and then there was the Mon Cala eel that was harnessed as a torture device on prisoners, as well as the scarier Chorn, an eel that would often resort to cannibalism and was considered a delicacy by the Quarrens, and by no one else. Flailers were leech-like creatures that would suck your blood, and of course there were countless types of fish, many of which were kept as pets, with Calamari debating as to which ones were the smartest, much like many dog breeds here on Earth. The organic gill was a bioengineered species. It naturally converted water into oxygen, and with some tweaking they could be mass-grown and altered to sell as a face mask for offworlders, acting as a more efficient and environmentally friendly form of diving gear. Trumpetweed was a plant that when fossilized was seen as a beautiful piece of natural art by many species. Quarren Senator TKs gave some of these to the Naboo Senator Palpatine, even including enormous pearls to set up on top. And one tourist attraction was that once a year, billions of single-celled algae bloomed, causing a green stripe across the equator of the planet. But the last two creatures I want to mention are the most noteworthy telepaths. The Moapa were a telepathic species that would normally float through the seas as individuals, but could physically link for both offense and defense, which also turned them from mindless organisms into a great collective intelligence. During the Clone Wars, they would align with the Quarren Isolation League, and one grouping even attacked Kit Fisto. Once he learned how intelligent this race could be, he ordered that the Calamari send diplomats, initiating talks that would eventually lead with a treaty with this unique species. But the strangest organism has to be the Knowledge Bank. In canon, they are simply known as the Intelligent Mollusk, and Senator TK's had at least one of them relocated to a pool inside of his office, located in the Senate building. They are sapient, bivalve mollusks found deep on the ocean floor. Their telepathic abilities are so powerful that the bank collectively forms a sort of computer archive, recording the thoughts of all life on Mon Cala, using the oceans as a giant connected medium, and controlling the minds of many fish species, acting as sorts of Wi-Fi extenders across the globe. Relays that would spread their telepathic ability so that they could collect the thoughts of everything throughout the years, developing a complete history of the planet through the eyes of each that lived it. When off-worlders came to visit, it would read their minds as well, developing a deep understanding of the galaxy at large. When Leia met with them, she reasoned that they must have a connection with the Force. And unlike those evil frogs, they seemed to be aligned with the light, reading the intentions of those who sought their wisdom, and only aiding enlightened Mon Calamari and Quarren, who would request knowledge through a complex religious ritual. While the minds of the off-worlders were unknowingly examined via the clam's fish spies, Leia is thought to be the only human to ever actually meet with the Knowledge Bank, and many of the native population had no clue where these mythological beings were, making me think that Senator TK's display on Coruscant had to be seen as either an outrageously offensive action, or the complete opposite, that the Knowledge Bank requested to have a member moved to the capital of the galaxy. What better place to collect even more information? And we can end the list of species with one mysterious artificial creature. One day over the seas near Foam Wander City, a strange metallic craft appeared, and suddenly dropped a device into the ocean. Soon after, nearby fishermen started hauling up 1.5 meter wide droids they called nanostars. It would move through a series of flexible screw appendages, and zap anything that came to investigate it. Their purpose and origin remain as one of the most confusing mysteries in the entire galaxy. So again, let me know what you think about them in the comments. As for its history, I already mentioned how the Mon Calamari's tech allowed them to become the dominant species on Dak. And though their government would change over the millennia, even at the time of the Clone Wars it was still a monarchy with a representative council. It was also an inherited throne, and this was a constant source of tension with the Quarren. Dooku had their king Yos Kalina assassinated, and pushed Quarren chieftain No Sarai to secede, dragging the entire planet into civil war. As soon as the Empire came to power, this was one of their first targets, mostly for the reasons Tarkin mentioned earlier, that if these fish folk denied the Emperor, it would be inspiring to many, and their tech would provide enormous military aid to any rebels. The siege of this world was intense, but the Mon Calamari were able to convert some of their cities into enormous starships, breaking through the blockade and fulfilling one of the Emperor's worst nightmares, as the Mon Cala fleets and expertise were the single largest addition to the Rebel Alliance. Later, they would find Imperial records that confirmed a fear that Luke Skywalker had experienced in a dream state, showing that just like his vision, after Alderaan, Mon Cala was sent to be destroyed by the first Death Star, and the first target of the second Death Star was this watery world. Later, during the rise of the First Order, history would repeat itself. This time it would be No Sarai's advisor, Guy, who wanted the Quarren to become the rulers of Dak, secretly contacting the First Order and reporting on the ships that were being made for the New Republic. General Hux would personally lead the attack, but we can assume that this was a Resistance victory. Now in the Legends timeline, the Mon Calamari and Quarren were able to drive off their Imperial overlords, these two species dedicating everything to the Alliance, and their shipyards would undergo continuous expansion and upgrades for over a century. They would be crucial to the defeat of the extragalactic invaders the Yuuzhan Vong, and the many Imperial remnant groups that rose up over the years. By the year 137 ABY, Mon Cala's orbital shipyard was larger than that of Kuat Drive Yards, the once undisputed King shipwright. But during the Second Imperial Civil War, this planet was again captured by the Empire. In an Alliance fleet counterattack, 1/3 of the shipyard was destroyed, and the Scythe scientist Vol-Ison unleashed a poison that would spread throughout the entire watery world, an attempt by this new empire to eliminate the threats from Dak once and for all. The Alliance was only able to evacuate 20% of the 27 billion population of sapient creatures, like the Mon Calamari, Quarren, Whalodons, and Moapa, while all of the planet and animal life left behind was killed. Besides any of them that might be in captivity off-world, they were now completely extinct, including the Knowledge Bank. And this fate of Mon Cala was never reversed. Many of the survivors were transported to live inside of the orbital shipyard, but that's how it was left in Legends. The sad ending to one of the most vibrant, interesting, and important worlds in the entire galaxy. So that's it for Dak or Mon Cala, but you definitely want to hear the cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The very first mention of this planet was in the 1982 issue of Bantha Tracks, where they gave readers a preview of the Mon Calamari species, saying that they hailed from the planet Dak. Their home would later be called Calamari, Mon Calamari, Mon's Calamari, and Mon Cala in various media over the decades. And the name Dak was for a time so obscure that people debated if it was canon. It wasn't until the RPG guide Geonosis and the Outer Rim Worlds brought it back, and then it would be called that in various other media throughout the years. The water world would go on to become one of the most depicted planets in Star Wars media, perhaps the most of any world that was not in the films. Speaking of which, and this might really upset you, but that canon comic I mentioned where the First Order is assembling over Mon Cala simply ends and says continued in the Rise of Skywalker. This battle was not concluded in any other material, so I have to guess that this was just another storyline that was abandoned in the new trilogy. To think we could have not only seen this world in a film, but a major space battle between one of the New Republic's greatest shipwrights. Don't think about it too long. This world has also appeared in a ton of video games and comics, and a lot of the details come from there, but mostly the Essential Atlas, the Guide to Warfare, and Ultimate Star Wars. But most important of all, remember, everyone's gangster till the fish start turning their cities into starships, and the Force will be with you. Always.
Tras viva marga, robomanir gatimo.
Tireless.
Sabira Adhir Nara Empire Kippin.
Empire.
What's up, nerds? In this video we'll be breaking down the Quarren species. Everything from their planet, biology, culture, history, and impact on the galaxy. In the Outer Rim's Calamari sector lies a gleaming bluish-white orb known to its inhabitants as Dak. This ocean-covered planet, also called Mon Cala or Mon Calamari by human explorers from the Galactic Republic, dazzles viewers with its beauty from space. The diverse world is home to a wealth of sentient species: the Mon Calamari, the Quarren, the Moapa, the Amphihydrus, and the Whalodons, and the world would come to have a staggering population of 27.5 billion Mon Calamari and Quarren. Its shimmering oceans stretch uninterrupted save for a few scattered reefs and atolls, creating a vast aquatic paradise, with 398 day years and each day lasting 21 hours. The world is strategically positioned on the Overic, Griplik, and the Giblim route, two significant hyperlanes, allowing the planet to serve as a crucial waypoint in the galaxy. The Quarren, with their squid-like heads and leathery skin, were amphibious humanoids resembling cephalopods. Their faces featured at least 4 tentacles, which they used to handle food. They had small mouths with 2 sharp teeth on either side of a long, thin tongue between them. From each side of their face extended 2 long protrusions containing structures for hearing, serving the same role as ears. They had holes in their neck for breathing and 2 sac-like organs hanging from the back of their heads. Quarren could change their skin color during mating rituals. Most had orange skin, though rare individuals displayed gray-green, pink, or purple hues. They all possessed shimmering turquoise blue eyes, and as aquatic beings they needed to keep their skin moist to survive, though the ones with claws required less moisture. And they lived for about 79 standard years and stood around 1.7 meters, 5 feet 7 inches tall, which is right around most humanoids. There were 3 types of Quarren distinguished by their hands. Some had fingers with suction cups, either 3 or 5, while others had thick fingers without suction cups but had those sharp claws. Whether these differences indicated distinct subspecies is unclear. Having evolved in the depths of Mon Calamari, the Quarren were naturally adapted to the high pressures of their underwater world. They could dive to depths of 300 meters without needing any breathing or pressure apparatus. However, ascending from the depths of 50 meters or more required careful decompression, a process that took as much time as they had spent below. This allowed their bodies to adjust to the lower pressure near the surface. The Quarren were a proud and self-centered species, often bordering on xenophobia, which aligned with their isolationist tendencies. They viewed humans as crude and found Galactic Basic, the common language, to be cumbersome and unsuitable for speech. Instead, they preferred their native language, using it far more frequently than the Mon Calamari, who often spoke Basic to interact with Offworlders, which is also something the Quarren rarely did. In sharp contrast with their neighbors, the Quarren were conservative and practical thinkers. While Mon Calamari looked toward the future and explored the galaxy, the Quarren were deeply rooted in their traditions, remembering their past, and this conservative nature made them more isolationist, preferring to stay in the ocean depths of their homeworld. Yet eventually some Quarren did venture out, following Mon Calamari, and for some reason settled around the career of business managers and accountants. While the Mon Calamari excelled in manufacturing starships and their orbital shipyards, the Quarren worked diligently to mine metal ore from the ocean's deepest parts. They also played a crucial role in building the massive floating cities for the Mon Calamari. While most of their neighbors lived on the scattered islands of Dak or in the upper levels of these floating cities, the Quarren preferred the darkness of the deep ocean. They built their own cities beneath the waves or lived in the lower levels of the cities, which stretched far below the surface. Though you might see some parallels there with Coruscant, the Quarren really were more comfortable in the dark depths, contrasting sharply with the light-loving Mon Calamari. Something many species would come to moralize, as most of the spacefaring races across the galaxy evolved on their surface, and so at least the Mon Calamari were close to that, and there was a natural fear of creatures that wanted to dwell in the darkness below. The Quarren shared their deep-sea home with other fascinating species, including the Whalodons, the Moapa, and the enigmatic Knowledge Bank. In their local language called the Pukaukau, they were like sentient mollusk supercomputers that recorded every event that happened in the oceans, and then could communicate with other species via telepathy. It's one of the strangest creatures in the entire galaxy, and one of the Quarren's deep underwater neighbors. In ancient times, the Quarren had a warrior caste known as the Kokad, who were charged with protecting their people from the many dangerous sea creatures that inhabited their world. And so you can see these are people that are truly shaped by the high-pressure depths of Dak's oceans. Circa 4500 BBY, the Quarren encountered the Mon Calamari for the first time. Their neighbors residing in the shallower parts of the ocean were met with suspicion and hostility from the Quarren, who attacked them first, sparking what would seem like a never-ending feud. Despite being less aggressive, the Mon Calamari possessed superior technology and ultimately emerged victorious. They chose not to pursue further conflict, fearing it would lead to the Quarren's extinction. As the Quarren recovered from the war, the Mon Calamari embarked on a bold cultural experiment to prevent future conflicts. They captured hundreds of young Quarren and immersed them in Mon Calamari civilization, teaching them arts, sciences, and ethics. And once fully educated, these young Quarren were released back to their communities. This led to a rift within Quarren society. The elder generations distrusted the younger ones, viewing them as brainwashed usurpers, while the youth saw their elders as uneducated barbarians. Eventually, the educated youth assumed control, leading to a fragile peace that lasted for centuries. Although tensions occasionally resurfaced as new generations of Quarren reverted to traditional values, the overall relationship between the two species remained stable. As peace settled, many Quarrens began venturing off-planet, finding roles as business managers and accountants. They spread across the galaxy, reaching as far as Taurus, Telos IV, and Nar Shaddaa. Some Quarren even joined the Exchange, bringing their efficacy to the criminal syndicate. During the New Sith Wars, Quarren found themselves on both sides of the conflict, fighting in both the Army of Light and the Brotherhood of Darkness. This turbulent period showcased the Quarren's complex nature and adaptability, though having a preference for isolation, dwelling alone in the darkness. When they engaged with the galaxy at large, they did excel. But around 500 years before the Battle of Naboo, a very significant event further shaped Quarren history. Hugo Barton, seeking amphibian fishermen for a new settlement in Lamorid, enticed impoverished Mon Calamari in Quarren with promises of untouched seas and a fresh start. Upon arrival, however, these hopeful settlers were forced into slave labor and confined to crowded conditions. The long-standing animosity between Mon Calamari and Quarren quickly escalated into violence, leading to the creation of a Quarren colony called the Shoals, and the formation of at least one Quarren swoop gang. Later, Mon Calamari joined the Galactic Republic, gaining representation in the Senate. And for at least the last decade of the Old Republic, Mon Calamari's government and its representation in the Galactic Senate were shared between the Mon Calamari and Quarren. This partnership highlighted the ongoing but fragile coexistence of these two species. Just before the Clone Wars, a scandal involving Quarren Senator TKs shook the Calamari sector. TKs allowed Thalassian slavers to operate within the sector, a decision that, when eventually exposed, led to his house arrest. Under immense pressure, TKs defected to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, taking many of his people with him. This move was highly controversial and sparked opposition from many citizens on Dak, and TKs in response formed the Quarren Isolation League, and with reinforcements from the CIS, moved against the Mon Calamari Council, the ruling legislative body of Dak. The Republic supported the Mon Calamari and the loyal Quarren in this conflict, further deepening the divisions on the planet. A civil war erupted on Dak, pitting the Republic loyalist Mon Calamari Knights and Republic forces against the Quarren Isolation League and the separatist-aligned Mon Calamari led by Mirai. After numerous skirmishes, the Republic triumphed over the Quarren Isolation League in the decisive Battle of Mon Calamari. Following the conflict, new accords were signed, and pro-Republic senators Tundra Dalmia and Mina Tills, a Mon Calamari, jointly represented Dak in the Senate. However, not all Quarren were satisfied with this resolution. The remnants of the Quarren Isolation League formed the Free Dak Volunteers Engineering Corps, an organization primarily composed of Quarren exiles on separatist worlds like Mintuine and Pemant. They continued to support the CIS by manufacturing many of its warships, including the Providence class, Recusant, and Subjugator class heavy cruiser. And it's because of this enormous contribution to the CIS that many in the Republic were desperate to strike back somehow. This allegiance led to Quarrens being among the species deported from Coruscant by Tannen Praji, under the influence of the Human Suppressionist Commission for the Protection of the Republic. Around 21 BBY, a second battle for control of Mon Calamari ensued when the Quarren, backed by the CIS, attempted to seize the Calamari system. The Jedi Order intervened, bringing reinforcements from the Grand Army of the Republic and the Gungan Grand Army. Despite their efforts, Separatist Commander Riff Tamsin, of the Carcharodon species, proved to be a formidable foe. His tactics led to the capture of all Republic forces except Ahsoka Tano and Prince Lichar, the heir to the Mon Calamari throne. Quarren leader No Sarai soon realized that Tamsin and Count Dooku intended to take Dak for themselves, rather than for the Quarren people. Seeing the betrayal, he would re-ally with the Republic, and together they successfully routed the Separatists, restoring a precarious peace to Dak. This both showed how weak this world was when these two species were split against each other, but also how powerful they could be when allied. Mon Calamari faced a brutal invasion by Imperial forces. The humanocentric Imperials viewed the people of Dak, particularly the industrious Mon Calamari, as high-quality slaves to fuel the Imperial war machine. Also, the planet's senators had signed the Petition of 2000, an anti-Palpatine document, which further incited the Emperor's wrath. Some reports suggest that Quarren agents, driven by their deep-seated animosity toward the Mon Calamari, sabotaged the planetary shields just before the Imperial attack, leading to a swift and decisive victory for the Empire. Segor Tells, a prominent Quarren leader, did later confess to being one of these saboteurs. Despite some Quarren initially complying with the Empire, both Quarren and Mon Calamari were enslaved. The Quarren's enslavement may have been a consequence of their previous alliance with the Confederacy, while Mon Calamari's attempts at passive resistance led to harsh reprisals. In a brutal show of force, Emperor Palpatine ordered the destruction of 3 major Mon Calamari cities, turning these massive works of art, the chandelier cities of the sea, into debris scattered across the seabed. However, the oppression eventually united the Quarren and Mon Calamari against their common enemy. Ironically, Segor Tells, who had once facilitated the Imperial conquest, became a key figure in rallying the Quarren to resist the Empire, and together these two species succeeded in driving the Imps off Dak. Following the liberation of Mon Calamari, many Quarren chose to distance themselves from the Rebel Alliance and its successor, the New Republic. Fearing further Imperial reprisals, numerous Quarrens left Mon Calamari for other worlds, seeking safety and a fresh start away from the conflicts that plagued their homeworld. After the reborn Palpatine's assault on Dak in 10 ABY, the Quarren threatened to leave in a mass exodus, though it remains unclear how many actually did. And over time, many Quarren dispersed throughout the galaxy, finding new homes on various worlds. Those who remained on Mon Calamari continued to show loyalty to their people, and relationships began to blossom between the Quarren and the Mon Calamari. One notable example was the romantic relationship between the male Quarren Narin Vakal and the Mon Calamari female Ibtisam, both elite members of Rogue Squadron. Around 9 ABY, we see Captain Shugoth, who we can see has this specialized device to make her feel like she's back at home, and she fell in love with a Mon Calamari prince, eloping on the captain's starship before being tracked down by the Mandalorian mercenaries led by Axe Wolves. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, a Quarren named Po represented Dak alongside the Mon Calamari Grand Marab. Following the loss of Coruscant to the Yuuzhan Vong, Po attempted to usurp the New Republic presidency, but failed and eventually joined the Elysian Republic on Elysia. Meanwhile, Grand Marab remained loyal, and continued to represent Mon Calamari in the Senate of the Galactic Alliance. By 130 ABY, after the Sith Imperial War and the rise of Darth Krayt as Galactic Emperor, the Quarren gained significant influence as members of the new Sith Order, with some holding high positions in the government of Dak. Two prominent Quarren Sith Lords were Darth Malevel and Darth Azard, and following the Battle of Mon Calamari, the Quarren were initially spared from Emperor Krayt's decree to execute 10% of Dak's population, which included the members of the Mon Calamari Council. However, Quarren who opposed these orders were executed as well. When the genocide reached a standstill, the destruction of Vol Isen's Sea Leviathan, Darth Warlock, Krayt's successor, ordered the execution of the Final Protocol, which would poison Dak's oceans and render the planet uninhabitable within 7 days. When Darth Azard inquired about the Quarren, who had collaborated with the Sith Empire, Warlock coldly responded that the Quarren would be allowed to leave the planet, but without any Imperial assistance. As the galaxy learned of the Final Protocol, Regent Morlish Veed faced backlash from Quarren ministers, having to answer for the Sith's actions. And during the evacuation of Dak, organized by Admiral Gar Stasi of the Galactic Alliance Remnant, a Quarren delegation demanded that their species receive greater priority in the evacuation efforts over the Whalodons and Mawapa. But given the Quarren's collaboration with the Empire, Admiral Stasi decreed that they would only be allocated every 10th ship in the evacuation fleet, and warned that those attempting to board other ships would be shot. Following the downfall of the One Sith, the galaxy saw the Sith retreat into the shadows as a new power rose on Coruscant. The Galactic Federation Triumvirate, composed of the Fel Empire, the Jedi Order, and the Galactic Alliance, took the reins of leadership. In 138 ABY, a sinister scheme unfolded as numerous Quarren and Mon Calamari were lured back to Dak with the promises of a renewed world. Instead, they found themselves ensnared by a pirate syndicate led by the rogue Sith Darth Luft. Forced into slavery, they toiled to build a fleet of ships, while their children and elderly relatives were held hostage. These pirates ruled with cruelty, meting out beatings and abuse. Amid all this turmoil, a Quarren named Tikkun struck up an unlikely friendship with a Mon Calamari environmental engineer named Lurin. Their alliance caught the attention of Imperial Knight Jao Assam and junk dealer Anaya Solo. Realizing the dire situation, Assam and Solo quickly relayed the grim news to the triumvirate authorities on Coruscant. The murder of Tikkun by Darth Luft became the catalyst for a desperate uprising. United in their suffering, the Quarren and Mon Calamari joined forces to rebel against their captors. This revolt coincided with a coordinated attack by the Galactic Triumvirate, led by Admiral Stasi and the Imperial Knight Yalta Vol. In the ensuing battle, the enslaved workers were freed, and the pirates were captured. Darth Luft met his end in a fierce duel with Jao Assam. In the aftermath, the liberated Quarren and Mon Calamari found refuge in a specially prepared space station, its chambers flooded with water to replicate their aquatic home. This gesture by Admiral Stasi created a haven for the former slaves. As a powerful symbol of reconciliation and unity, Tikkun's son, Tillin, was taken in by Aunt Lun, blending their families and the future of these two species, with all hoping that they would break the cycle of these two fish folk fighting against each other, and together they could build a strong future for both species. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, Tessik ended up in the court of Jabba the Hutt after fleeing Dak during the Imperial invasion, and though he survived the destruction of the sail barge, his brain was forcibly removed from his body by the Ba'omar monks, placing him in that unfathomable hellish existence of the brain in the spider jar. If you want to learn more, a lot of this comes from the Essential Guide to Alien Species, the Atlas, and the Galactic Campaign Guide. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, if you did judge the species that dwelled in darkness, well, historically speaking, you'd be right about every time. And the Force will be with you, always.
Foolish Republic scum! Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields.
What's up, meta nerds? This will be a complete breakdown of the Providence class dreadnought, one of the most important ships in the CIS Navy. We'll look at everything from firepower, complement, capacity, and how it shaped the Clone Wars. Specific ships like the Invincible, Lucid Voice, and Invisible Hand, and even how the scraps of these ships would come to haunt the Imperial era, an attempt to destroy Tarkin's rise to power. This capital ship was both designed and constructed by the Quarren of the Free Dak Volunteers Engineering Corps, with collaboration in some parts coming from Rendili Star Drive. The Quarren shared their homeworld DAC with the Mon Calamari, and like the old phrase says, coral sharpens coral, or something like that. And just as the Mon Calamari were famed for being the best engineers in the galaxy for most of history, so much so that their prowess would end up providing the Rebel Alliance with a powerful edge, their rivalry drove the Quarren to be excellent shipwrights also. At the time of the Clone Wars, the tension between these two species came to a head. Mon Calamari had always seen themselves as the more wise and peaceful of the two, and the galaxy seemed to agree, with almost all political power and wealth ending up in the hands of the fish folk, not the squidbillies. So it's a small-scale example of what happened to the galaxy as a whole, with the secession of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and Dooku knew that the Quarren would make for a natural ally. This secession occurred about 2 years before the war officially broke out, and while the founding of the Free DAC Volunteer Engineering Corps is stated at 22 BBY, we can assume that construction of these massive warships began at a time when it was still illegal under Republic law. Mon Calamari shipyards could pump out a star cruiser in 6 months, and the Empire at its peak was claiming anywhere from 3 months to 2 years to build an Imperial Star Destroyer. So let's say around a year for a Providence, likely constructed in those years leading up to the Battle of Geonosis. The Quarren shipyard was located on the planet Pamant, which already had a several millennia-old colony of anti-Calamarians, and these Pamant docks would be a main shipyard for the Confederacy, producing almost all of the capital ships, including the experimental Malevolence. The Providence cost 125 million credits, while it seems that the larger version, that is twice its size, like the Invincible, cost 400,585,000 credits, which is more than twice the Imperial Star Destroyer. Powered by 3 Crevealed 4 radial ion engines, which were made by Nubia Star Drives, the producer of most of Naboo's ships, these top-of-the-line engines reached a max acceleration of 2,500 G and 70 megalight per hour, with a top atmospheric speed of 2,000 kilometers per hour, which made it faster than almost all starfighters, and would leave other capital ships in the dust, while being more than twice the Venator, which was known for its speed. And though the Venator was quicker in hyperspace, the Class 1.5 hyperdrive puts the Providence right in between the Venator and ISD. To achieve this, the entire aft section was filled with primary and auxiliary reactors, while there were also subsidiary reactors and hyperdrive fuel silos located towards the bow, right below the command bridge, which provided a 180-degree view of the battlefront, and was packed with the best sensor and navigational equipment credits could buy, as well as a suite of dedicated computers to track everything going on inside of the Providence, track the starfighters connected on the surface of it, and of course how they were deployed out in space. With scanners that could reach out to search through entire solar systems and send out encrypted messages through hyper relays all across the galaxy in an instant, with incredibly complex arrays filling up this spire, an area that was connected by 5 turbolifts, with the uppermost part of the spire containing the private quarters of the warship's commanding officer. On Dooku's Providence, they nicknamed it the Wizard's Tower, as he would set it up like a meditation chamber. And just like how Sidious could choke out people via holo, Dooku would try to radiate his will into populations through a unique form of propaganda that combined force suggestion and high-tech broadcast equipment. In the Old Republic times, there was the practice of battle meditations, where powerful force users could increase the will of their fighters.
Bastila is no longer using her battle meditation against us. The tide has turned.
So it's interesting to wonder if the Providence was ever used for this purpose during the Clone Wars. Like the rounded shapes of the Mon Cala craft, the Quarrens used a streamlined modular design to construct the Providence, with a large cylinder at the center, and then more tubes to circle around that one, cutting away where they connect to create a really powerful and aerodynamic design. A unique geometry that dispersed the weight better than most competitors. And just because they spent a lot of time in space, all warships were still designed to travel through diverse planetary atmospheres as well, with emergency deceleration panels that can be used to rapidly slow down, so that if you wanted to, you could take full advantage of its speed and slam the brakes with a combo of reversing the thrusters. And this isn't explicitly stated anywhere, but most ships could also go underwater, especially the Mon Calamari design, and so it's reasonable to think that's true for the Quarren designs as well. This hull is also covered in hundreds of smaller sensors and comms that work to communicate with the droid starfighters, that could connect to just about anywhere on the outside of the ship for quicker deployment, or if the mission required them to pack on short term while you really filled up that hangar.
General Grievous's ship is directly ahead.
The one crawling with vulture droids.
But besides that, the standard complement was 120 vultures, 120 tri-fighters, 10 hyena bombers, usually all lining the hangar and connected to overhead racks, while right underneath this section is where the 160 MTTs, and roughly 280 vehicles in any combo of AATs, Hailfire droids, OG-9 Spider droids, and M9 432 Crab droids. With all these land vehicles usually packing into a C-9979 landing craft that transferred down to a planet's surface like with the Lucrehulks. The 900 crew members included organic officers, but was mostly droids, while it could transport 48,247 passengers, which is how these things were used for a great PR role when they evacuated whole settlements from the lawless pirates or corrupt Republic forces. And along with them, they had 1.5 million deactivated, stored battle droids packed in as well, with a 18,000 metric ton cargo capacity, which was used to move war materiel or relief aid for CIS worlds. The weapon systems and shielding were powerful enough to match, designed to be so strong that a single Providence could maintain a planetary blockade through expert use of the starfighter complement, speed, and firepower. Many of these guns were charged at a higher rate, and the number of guns in each battery were designed to pierce through the deflector shields of most ships out there. With its 14 port and starboard heavy quad turbolaser cannons, 34 dorsal and ventral turret mounted dual heavy laser cannons, 12 port and starboard twin light point defense ion cannons, and 2 forward-mounted battleship heavy ion cannons, as well as 102 proton torpedo launchers, with each carrying 3 torpedoes. And then you had 12 heavy flak guns and 10 heavy tractor beam emitters placed along its port and starboard side, which all makes for a brilliant and great purpose-built dreadnought. Remember, it is incredibly fast, and its speed would be shocking to even the most veteran pilots out there, something that forced the Republic to play catch-up early on in the war. All these heavy-rated weaponry are for punching through capital ships while leaving the anti-starfighter role to the point defense cannons, using less energy since they are just ion cannons, and so they could leave an enemy starfighter or vessel dead in space, letting the vultures or hyenas blow them to bits, allowing for the Providence to focus on the main enemy craft. The 2 heavy ion cannons are forward-facing, for a full steam-ahead attack that would short out the enemy shield generators and unleash its proton torpedoes, with that large forward beak-like rostrum for ramming into a ship if the need arose. If the enemy was to the side, the heavy cannons could overwhelm the shields, and let the port or starboard tractor beams keep the target in place for a barrage of torpedoes and then let the droid fighters swarm and envelop them. While on defense, this enormous credit investment was protected by a state-of-the-art thermal shielding, which was able to handle long barrages of even heavy turbolaser fire. Now there were some variants like the Providence carrier, which enlarged this hangar, likely stripping away the passenger and maybe even the B-1 droid troop sections, as well as the simply named larger model, which is almost exactly double the size of the standard version. At 2,177.35 meters long, or 1.35 miles, it was nearly twice the Venator, longer than an ISD, but still half that of a subjugator. Having a supersized version of the same ship might seem odd, but they did the same thing with the Recusant too. And the standard size Providence was actually shorter than the standard Recusant, despite being more powerful, while being less than half as wide as a Venator and about 1.5 times taller, though that height is mostly in these spires. And if it showed up here on Earth, it would be between the height of the Eiffel Tower and Empire State Building. You'll see as we look through its history that it is often the command ship of large CIS fleets, being the home base using its vast array of sensors and protective cloud of fire to act like a fortress, a wall other CIS vessels could retreat behind if need be, and from which the commander would coordinate the entire mission. Though none of the major CIS capital ships would be present during the Battle of Geonosis, or more accurately the evacuation of Geonosis by CIS leadership, days later General Worm Loathsome would head the siege of Christophsis, in the CIS's hopes to cut off the Republic access to the Corellian Run, sending a fleet that included 23 Munificents, 6 Lucrehulks, and a Providence to coordinate them all. While the General would lead the fight planetside, this particular Providence was the Invincible, the flagship of the infamous Admiral Trench. Republic Admiral Yularen recognized the Harch Admiral from before the war, at a time when Trench was the commander of corporate fleets. His command of this supersized Providence is evidence that he was the best admiral in the CIS. Anakin would attempt a rescue mission to Christophsis, and Trench showed why his style paired so well with this powerful dreadnought.
The command ship is bearing down on us!
Though the command ship, he sees that he can crush this smaller fleet of 3 Venators and 3 Pelta-class medical frigates. It's obvious that they are attempting a blockade run, not trying to clear out the entire blockade, and so he uses the ship's speed to close the gap in hopes of forcing them to retreat. The sheer firepower of the Venator demanded respect, so it isn't that Trench thinks this trio can't do anything to him, but by being so aggressive with this larger variant, he can make the Republic Admiral realize that there was no hope at just blowing through a gap in the blockade. Best case, they would lose most of their ships just engaging this single Providence. When Kenobi arrives with his Venator, the Negotiator, he assures his Padawan that they had a secret weapon, and they need to retreat for now. Frustrated, Skywalker does comply, and Republic forces retreat behind the moon. T-Series droid TI-99 recommended they pursue, but Trench disagrees.
They are escaping. Should we go after them? No! Our orders are to blockade, not chase. I have won this round. Recycle the shields and let the cannons reset to a full charge.
He knows the biggest advantage is the thermal shielding, and the power of those heavy cannons and torpedoes. The prototype stealth ship would emerge from behind the moon and pass right by the Munificence on its approach to Christophsis, while Trench was ordering the bombers to be launched to finish off Bail Organa's Republic forces. This worked to pressure Kenobi to rush to Bail's defense and engage, which leads both Skywalker and Yularen to agree that Kenobi was wrong here, that Trench was baiting him, and though Skywalker is the only one crazy enough to think to use the stealth prototype against this supersized dreadnought,
Sir?
You heard me, Admiral.
What are you doing?
and even Trench is surprised.
This is unusual. What can they be planning?
Minutes later, he can tell something is off, and spots the ship the second it decloaks.
There! A cloaked ship!
The Republic knew to target the command bridge right up front, but the shielding did its job.
Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields.
While the cannon fire tries to hit them, and Trench can tell by this expert piloting that his enemy is a Jedi pilot, not a clone. The ship was able to go stealth again, and Trench knows he just has to wait, while also launching some psychological weapons.
You have an impressive new vessel, but I warn you, I have dealt with its kind before.
Whether it is personal cloaks or these cloak shipping technologies, there have been a long history of their use, but they were never that widespread. Trench's experience defending corporate space was invaluable, seeing all sorts of odd tactics and technologies from various star systems, and he's likely the only person on either side to have had history taking out cloaked ships.
Maybe he's tracking the magnetic signature.
The only way to test this theory was to let the missiles get a lock on them, and when the clone engineers confirmed that it was via magnetic signature, as the stealth ship turns towards them, the smaller craft was not as easy to hit with the heavy turbo lasers, and was so fast that within seconds it was barreling towards the bridge, and Trench knew his only hope was with the shielding.
Raise the shields!
We cannot. The shields are still recharging.
Made to slug it out in capital ship battles, the enemy ship wasn't supposed to be able to close the gap in between shield generation, something that proved fatal when faced against the brazen tactics of a smaller, faster craft. And once the Invincible was out of the fight, the blockade quickly became disorganized and the Republic was able to protect their allies on world. A year later, the CIS was going on a war crime spree, using smaller fleets anchored by a Providence to conduct hit-and-run attacks on Republic medical space stations throughout the galaxy. It might seem like an odd role for the powerful dreadnought, but morality aside, it was a creative use of its overwhelming power and speed, popping out of hyperspace, blasting right through whatever shielding it had, without much concern for smaller defense forces, and then slipping away through the blue void. Grievous would lead the assault on Kamino, but not from the invisible hand, though this unnamed Providence would take up the intended role as a command ship for the overall fleet, serving the same role during the Battle of Sullust, where Sidious ordered Dooku to execute his assassin. The CIS ships focused their fire on this Providence in an attempt to kill her. They're again seen using their overwhelming power to capture Even Peel, and later used to capture Adigalia by boarding her Venator, before blowing it apart with this same trio of ships tactic that we saw with the hit and runs on medical stations. This isn't confirmed, but perhaps smaller Providence-led fleets were launched to blitz any Republic assets caught lacking a sufficient fleet. Intel Sidious often leaked to Dooku, so these ship trios were acting like special forces, assassin/kidnapping squads. When the Umbaran seceded and threw in with the CIS, an enormous fleet was rapidly deployed here to establish a blockade, which, though not perfect, the blockade greatly restricted the forces that were able to make it on-world, causing the Battle of Umbara to be one of the bloodiest for the Republic, with officers on the Providence coordinating the dozens of support craft that filled the skies. And though in the Battle of Dathomir we don't really see much of the orbital support, Dooku and Grievous weren't playing around when it came to ending the Night Sisters, sending a fleet with 4 Munificents, 2 Recusants, 2 supply ships, and a Providence, all to end a tribe of witches with no navy. When the CIS developed an encryption module that allowed them to crack Republic transmission codes, they placed it inside a powerful dreadnought with a full fleet of support, connecting the module to an excellent suite of sensors and hyperwave transmitters to try and track Republic movement all across the galaxy. The super tactical droid Ott-O was the commander of this fleet and had his prize tech stolen when D-Squad infiltrated the Providence. By 20 BBY, Grievous's well-honed blitz method got him the greatest win yet, destroying the flagship of his archenemy Kenobi when they swarmed his ship and forced the Jedi to set it to blow after being overwhelmed. A year later, we see 5 of them in defense of Ringovinda, and Dooku would arrive in his personal fleet to force Clovis's hand in a move that would end up pressuring the Republic to take control of the banks. When Skywalker's fleet arrives, Dooku fled and what could have been an epic but deadly space battle was avoided. In the final months of the war, it would act as the command ship for Grievous's assault on Maul's Shadow Collective, and then Trench's final battle over Anaxis. The Republic shipyards here were some of the most important in the galaxy, and after escaping death over Christophsis, and surviving the Battle of Ringovinda, his new flagship, the the Invulnerable, was leading the assault with 2 other Providence dreadnoughts, 7 munificents, 2 recusants, and 6 Omni support vessels. This assault would last for weeks, with Trench's secret weapon being the strategy algorithm designed by Rex and extracted by Echo. The clone who was thought long dead, but had been reduced to a husk, a biological computer hooked up to a CIS system that would mine his mind for valuable Republic intel. When Echo was recovered, and Skywalker with Clone Force 99 were able to sneak onto the flagship, Trench was finally killed, and the Jedi used the Providence class's self-destruct feature to turn its sheer size and reactors against the fleet, igniting a chain reaction as debris from the Invulnerable barraged all the allies in its path. In what would prove to be the final days of the war, space battles were increasing along major hyperroutes, and reinforcements were sent to crush Plo Koon in the 442nd Siege Battalion's push to liberate Cato Neimoidia, which was followed by the single largest battle of the war, when over 1,000 CIS craft, led by Grievous upon the Invisible Hand, took this blitz tactic to another level. Just like how it worked to take out med stations and kidnap Jedi generals, scaled up, the principles were the same. The relatively untested Coruscant home defense fleet was quickly rendered useless, as Grievous barreled through the orbital defenses, down into the atmosphere, and captured the Supreme Chancellor. Getting him back into the Invisible Hand, the supposedly most powerful man in the galaxy was now in restraints, at the mercy of Grievous and Dooku. Just as Sidious planned, the Republic's Open Circle fleet, along with Kenobi and the Chosen One, would arrive just in time to cut off the CIS escape. After navigating through clouds of droid fighters, they were able to deactivate the deflector shields that protected the hangar, and make their way through the ship. Dooku didn't realize that his beheading was also right in line with the plan, but the broadside volley from the Venator Gwalara shook things up, blasting through the massive dreadnought and setting off proton bombs to create a chain reaction that caused the repulsor fields and power systems to fail, sending the ship into a nosedive as it was no longer countering the gravitational effects of Coruscant, and you can see a glimmer of the shielding struggling to keep up. As it plummeted, loose ships and massive MTTs were launched across the hangar, but reversing the stabilizers and Grievous's quick call,
Fire the emergency booster engines!
did help to level out the ship, and he used the in-ship security features like ray shields and droidicas to help capture these Republic VIPs. While the fight in the command bridge resulted in Grievous's escape through the window, forcing an emergency viewport wall to engage to seal the room, and the cyborg would get away by launching all of the escape pods at once, in order to minimize his odds of being shot down or captured. But as the Invisible Hand kept barreling through the atmosphere, more systems were failing, and the entire aft section rips away, leaving only that original central tube that the rest of the Providence tubes are built around. This main section is expertly set down by the galaxy's best pilot for what only could be described as
another happy landing.
While Coruscant celebrated the heroic rescue of their beloved leader, roughly 250,000 people were killed by the falling debris of the Invisible Hand, mostly this main back section, which could have easily taken out several skyscrapers. And symbolic of the charade of war, once the dust cleared, the Emperor was on his throne, and Republic and CIS craft all went to the same grave, on the junkyard world of Bracca. Enormous efforts went into dismantling all sorts of ships, and this is a breeding ground for corruption and black market opportunities. The Invincible and Lucid Voice ended up here, and with some clever and covert movements, Birch Teller's rebel group were able to Frankenstein themselves a smaller but still powerful version of a Providence. This was long before the Unified Rebel Alliance, and this group was light years ahead of other resistance fighters who were using an odd laser cannon or have a good slicer in their midst. This Teller Providence was 920 meters long and had 12 turbolasers, 10 point defense ion cannons, and 6 proton torpedo launchers. Perhaps even if they could have stolen more than this, they likely wanted to keep it as streamlined as possible, so that they actually had enough fuel and munitions to use it. Pure efficiency, it must have been the most powerful rebel craft sailing the stars at this time, 14 BBY. Throw in that the Empire wasn't expecting anything like this, and you can see why they were able to get away with Grievous's old strategy for some time, before it came to the attention of Tarkin. Because outside of that firepower, their comms and sensor jamming suites were still functional, and used to cut off communications for backup, stop the spread of propaganda, and slice into hollow-wave transmitters to broadcast the true events of Imperial war crimes, stuff the news would never cover. While other times their armament was used to just blow up the hyperwave transmitters, there must have been countless rebels that would have been indirectly saved by these efforts, without even knowing who Birch Teller was or what his gang was up to, just thanking the force that stormtrooper backup never showed, or some TIE fighter patrol peeled off to deal with this mysterious communications failure. But with the attack on Sentinel Base, the secret Death Star construction facility that Tarkin was in charge of, he would get to figuring out who this enemy was, and knew that some of the IDs from the Clone Wars era must have still been in these Frankenstein parts.
Analysis of data received by the command center's friend or
foe indicator confirms that the capital ship is a downsized version of a separatist Providence-class cruiser carrier, modified with modules taken from CIS frigates and destroyers, which the SEPs usually mounted aft rather than forward, appear to have come from the cruiser Lucid Voice.
And as you might expect, Tarkin made sure that they would pay, and this respectable foe was added to Tarkin's long list of vanquished enemies, with the ship being destroyed in 14 BBY at the Gulf of Tatooine. Though there was at least one more Providence, this being the dedicated carrier variant that came into the naval forces of the Alliance to restore the Republic, the now unified Rebel force, and it was painted with their bold red color. So that's it for the breakdown. As for behind the scenes facts, this original cross-section is actually a source of a lot of canon material, like having the first mention of the Lucid Voice, as well as a ton of other details on how the ship works. The design was inspired by Zeppelins, and this sound was meant to reference the unique Zeppelin sound. Some depictions in video games put the bridge all over the place, from being in the center to the top of the spire, and this is one of the few ships or vehicles that had their stats dramatically changed from Legends to canon, almost double the speed, but my points earlier about it being surprisingly fast still stand, and even in Legends it was still faster than the Venator. And if you want to look into it more, a lot of these details come from these books. But most important of all, remember, the Force has a love of irony, so make sure your ship has a humble name, and the Force will be with you, always.
Get me a tractor beam lock on Kenobi's ship and prepare a boarding party.
What's up, meta nerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the Recusant class light destroyer. We will cover its history before, during, and after the Clone Wars, examine the larger variant that was more than twice its size, do a tour of the interior and exterior, and understand its armament, complement, role within a CIS fleet, and even end on some behind the scenes facts. If you learn anything new, please hit that like button, as it really helps to promote the video in the algorithm, and shows me you want to see more videos like this. And comment your thoughts on the Recusant, as well as what you'd like to see in future videos. But with that, let's head to the Outer Rim world of Dak, to see where this thing was first constructed. To most in the galaxy, this watery world was known as Mon Cala, named after its more popular species, the Mon Calamari. But Dak was the name the natives called this world, a place that was home to a rival high-tech people, the Quarren. These two species had been at war for most of their history, with the Calamari usually winning and lording over their more aggressive neighbors. But around 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the planetary government was able to keep the peace long enough to focus their efforts on constructing enormous shipyards in orbit above Dak. Together, these two once enemies could create high-tech works of art, incredible spacecraft that allowed them to colonize the worlds and moons in their solar system. Despite the shared effort by the Quarrens at every level from welder to engineer, space freighter to planet homesteading, the shipyard that would come to be renowned throughout the entire galaxy was called the Mon Calamari shipyards. Even just calling it the Dak shipyards would have gone a long way to show unity. And over the next 1,000 years, the tensions between these two species never died down. And when the entire galaxy was fracturing in the mid-20s BBY, the Quarren were finding their interests more aligned with those pushing for secession from the Republic. The Mon Calamari declared that their world would remain loyal, and this separation along species lines resulted in the latest of countless civil wars between these people. Count Dooku made sure that these Quarren would be taken care of, and many of the species would flee their homeworld and establish the Free Dak Volunteers Engineering Corps on a Commerce Guild-controlled water world of Mintuine. But before they fled, they made sure to take some designs for potential warships. The future leaders of the CIS would work together with these Quarren to ensure that they had everything they needed to build vessels for the coming war, connecting them with the Techno Union and Horish Kessel Drive in order to produce the Recusant class light destroyers. I should note that just because it was designed by the Mon Calamari shipyards, does not mean for sure that this was a Quarren stealing a Calamari design. It may have been drawn up by the squiddy hands of a Quarren who felt that his people were being ignored or oppressed by the centralized leaders. And if that was true, it would make the backstory of this ship a sort of metaphor for the Clone Wars. This destroyer was built around cutting-edge automated droid brain technology, which is what gave it its skeletal appearance, as many systems and sections for crews were not needed, allowing it to operate with only 300 crew, which themselves could be droids, while it could store an additional 40,000 battle droids. There were still several habitable decks located in this main area, but the majority of this ship is dedicated to the cargo, which would store the droids, weapons, and supplies for the CIS. This main section would contain the reactor that was claimed to annihilate 8,600 tons of fuel per second when traveling at its max speed and firing all of its weapons. The armored shaft that connects the main body to the engine array would contain a series of power and fuel lines, energizing these 3 sublight engines which could get the Recusant up to a mass acceleration of 2800 G. Something that was 300 G faster than the Providence, but 200 slower than the Venator, something Grievous and his T-Series tactical droid were well aware of.
The enemy ships are faster and more maneuverable. I suggest caution.
Its hyperdrive was rated as a Class 2 with a backup Class 12, putting it in the range of most capital ships. But like most things, it was slower than the remarkably quick Venator, and it had a max range of 30,000 light-years, which is half the Venator and about 1/8 the Acclamator. Like almost all spacecraft, it is equipped with an energy shield, and the armor is rated at 430 RU, which puts it in the range of the Nebulon B. One of the most unique features were these double-layered armor plates. Even if it was hit by armored penetrating missiles or heavy turbolaser fire, that would smash through this and into the second layer, an excellent way to block shrapnel from blasting through the decks. Though it does beg the question why this idea wasn't used around this weak junction between the engine array and the main body. It seems like you could have just easily made a series of tubes over the sections to have the same effect, but over an even more crucial area. As for the armament, the official numbers available do seem to be describing the larger variant, and so with that we'll start by looking under the bridge to find a massive heavy turbolaser cannon. There are 5 more of these heavies in the forward fixed or rear fixed position, along with 6 more that are on turrets, and then an insane amount of anti-starfighter weaponry in the form of point defense laser cannons. You can see some running along the vulnerable spine of the ship, which was its way of protecting against bombers going after this weak spot. But in total, all over the ship, there were 30 dual laser cannons, 12 dual light, and 60 single light point defense laser cannons. As for its complement, the Recusant, Munificent, and Providence all took advantage of the fact that their forces were made up of droid starfighters. Less of a need for a formal hangar bay when your pilot is built in, and is perfectly fine with being exposed to space indefinitely, magnetically attaching to any available surface, ready to swarm anyone that gets too close to the hive. But this design went even further to leave these empty spaces behind that armor plating, making a Durasteel grid that kept the area strong, but also left a lot of space for vultures and hyenas to attach and keep themselves out of incoming fire. Visiting ships would have to use the multiple docking tubes on the port and starboard sides, but the larger variant did have a decent sized pair of hangar bays added, and Grievous decided to get even more creative by having a C-9979 landing craft attached to the underside. They are not officially listed, but at least the larger variant did possess a tractor beam array that was powerful enough to bully an Arquitans, and even at least a heavily damaged Venator. Using this, Grievous's strategy would be to pull the enemy vessel toward one of the docking tubes, with the Republic vessel in a tractor lock.
Give me a tractor beam lock on Kenobi's ship and prepare a boarding party.
While many of the Recusant's own cannons could still fire on the ship that it was docked with, which was great against the Republic, but also for destroying ships of anyone that was summoned to meet with Grievous, just in case negotiations didn't go as planned. Because while many worlds freely chose to secede, Dooku and Grievous were not against using this tactic to encourage world leaders to join the Confederacy. Also, since it was almost always paired up with multiple Munificent-class frigates, they could scramble around dealing out their heavy firepower and pushing enemies towards the Recusant's heavy turbolasers, and or herd them closer to that powerful tractor beam's effective range. All of this was controlled by the bridge that would be commanded by a T-Series droid, with specific ship tasks being controlled by standard B1s. Interestingly, not the OOM pilot droids that we see with the Providence and Lucrehulk. Something that may be a hint at the power of this droid brain that this entire ship was designed around. An automated AI system that these other droids could easily interface with, and which the Separatists felt fine in trusting with the T-Series. Though the larger variants do seem like they always have an organic commander as well. The entire bridge is covered in these large transparent steel windows, a design which allows for an incredible visual of the battlefront, perhaps better than almost any other capital ship of this era. Another interesting detail is that this video comm system in the ship has a rare style that we see in the Lucrehulk, meaning that this must be a Horish Kessel Drive feature as they helped to build this vessel and were the sole shipwright of the Lucrehulk. Moving to the dorsal side, we see this forest of antenna that allowed this to communicate with a seemingly endless swarm of droids, as well as tracking enemy communications and securing their own transmissions while sending and receiving from CIS assets located across the galaxy. This sloping, rounded-off angle of the armor plating was designed to help better circulate the energy shields. And the ship could also store 10,000 tons of cargo, a weight equal to more than 12,000 dewbacks, while having enough supplies that it could last out on a mission for up to 2 years at a time. And here is one of the few times where we can see the smaller variant next to the larger one we saw used by Grievous. This standard one is 1,187 meters, or 0.74 miles long, making it about 4 ARC-170s longer than a Venator. It had a width of 157 meters, or about 515 feet, making it about 1/3 as wide as the Republic's cruiser. And it had a height of 163 meters, or 535 feet, making it about 61% as tall as the Venator, or about 8 sandcrawlers stacked on top of each other. While the larger variant was 2,544 meters, or 1.58 miles long, making it about more than twice the length of the Venator, or 1.5 times an Imperial Star Destroyer. If they showed up here on Earth, the standard version would be about 4.5 times that of the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, or about 1.4 times the height of the Burj Khalifa, while the larger variant would be about half as wide as Manhattan, or about 3 times the largest cruise ship, the Symphony of the Seas. After this destroyer started coming off the assembly lines on Mintuine, one of the things they noticed was a critical failure of that droid brain that streamlined most of the ship's processes. There were numerous collisions within the CIS fleet in these early weeks of the war, causing a panicked rush to update this AI system. It is unclear if the Republic was ever aware of this issue, and throughout the remainder of the war we wouldn't really see it, with one exception I'll get to in a second. Even after this update, one of the quirks that remained with the AI was their bloodlust. All of the Recusant's AIs would continue to fight against a target without giving up until it or themselves were destroyed. And luckily for the CIS tacticians, the T-Series or organic commanders would be able to override this default reaction. Throughout the war, we would see the larger variant in the cyborg hands of Grievous, using it over Seleucami and Camino. Many were protecting the CIS capital world of Raxus, and one shows us that it had enough firepower to take out the larger Providence class during the betrayal of Ventress. And many would be seen during the epic final moments of the Clone Wars during the Battle of Coruscant, where we do see that old AI bug kicking in, with some Recusants crashing into Munificence. But when you consider the fact that this whole war was created by and played on both sides by Darth Sidious, it is interesting to wonder if this was a bug or a feature. An Order 66, if you will, that could be switched on even with ships. Later this same year, in 19 BBY, a group of Jedi were able to commandeer a Recusant and flee Kashyyyk. Most of these vessels were destroyed by the Empire, but a few were repurposed into their navy or sold off to the Corporate Sector Authority, one of the few areas of the galaxy that was powerful enough to retain its independence during the Imperial era. Though with this process, at least one fell into the hands of the Rebellion, being seen in a major rebel fleet in the year 0 ABY. Though it did have to be extensively modified to allow for a larger organic crew that was now calling this separatist ship home. The legacy of the Recusant would fade over the following decades, but we see it one last time in the year 137 ABY, where it was used to make up the secret Jedi retreat on the planet Tyvos, the hidden temple of the Jedi during the Sith Imperial War. So that's it for its breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Some of the lore is definitely trying to make it seem like these were Commerce Guild ships that were always used for trade and that were repurposed for the war effort, with the ships being donated from all sorts of allies across countless worlds. But then other lore establishes that the Quarren took the plans from the Mon Calamari shipyards, and that it was always purpose designed for a warship to carry droid forces. I really like that original idea of them being repurposed commerce ships, and the only way I can think to smooth over these contradictions in the lore is to play with the timeline a bit, because it is true that the Republic allowed major companies to protect their interests with ships that were in effect war vessels, in order to combat the rise of pirates. And something that just has to be Republic propaganda is that it takes 4 to 6 Recusants to take out a single Venator, and 1,000 to take on a Mandator II class Star Dreadnought. The first time a Recusant was depicted was actually in the game Republic Commando, and then it was in Episode 3, followed by tons of appearances in novels and comics. As for sources, in canon we have the Visual Encyclopedia, Complete Vehicles, Rise of the Separatists, and Star Wars Armada, while Legends has the Essential Guide to Warfare, Complete Encyclopedia, Cross Sections Book, and Complete Locations. So that's it for the Recusant class Light Destroyer. But most important of all, remember, good AIs follow orders, and the Force will be with you, always.
Who cares about fate? I love you. And I will always love you.
What's up, meta nerds? This complete breakdown of the Mon Calamari species will pull from every resource available to completely understand one of the most important people in the history of the galaxy. Now, I've already made a whole video on just their home world of Dak. If you want to check that out, it'll have more detail, and same thing goes for their rivals and neighbors, the Quarren. But to make this video standalone, let's take a quick look at the planet that shaped the evolution of these fish folk. Located at U6 on the galactic map in the Outer Rim territories, within the Calamari sector of the Calamari system. You'll see that the fact that it's named after the Calamari and not the Quarren will be a point of contention in their history. But their solar system had 2 suns, while Dak itself was at the 2nd orbital position, and their world had a single moon. Dak teemed with a wide array of life forms, being home to not only the Quarren and Mon Calamari, but also creatures like the Whalodon and Mawapa, along with the intelligent mollusks known as the Knowledge Bank, and less intelligent creatures like the needlefish, tumblebasker, and sea tree. Now, the Mon Calamari are considered an amphibious humanoid species, typically standing between 1.3 to 1.8 meters, or about 5.3 inches tall. Most had salmon-colored skin, but the range is insane, from gold to white, brown, and pink. As Mon Calamari aged, their once vibrant skin would gradually fade, becoming more worn over time. Those from the colder polar regions tended to have duller coloration compared to the more colorful ones in the tropics, and their skin required regular moisture. Going too long without water caused it to dry out, crack, and even bleed, something that could be exploited as a method of torture. To survive droughts, they had a unique ability to produce a hibernation shell that encased their entire body, putting them into a state of biostasis until the conditions improved. Ecologist Elping Tsu suggested that this stasis could also be triggered by extreme stress or illness, and this theory was confirmed when the Mon Calamari gall tarpon spontaneously formed a protective shell after being infected by the blight. During prolonged dry spells, they would bury themselves in the damp seabed, where mud and moisture helped maintain their protective shell. If that shell retracted while they were still in a dry environment, it could result in something like suffocation. And they were said to have a distinct scent of salt in the sea no matter where they went. And no, this wasn't just a complaint from Palpatine, but even the most alien-friendly folk out there were taken aback by it sometimes. Their hands had 5 claw-tipped fingers, including an opposable thumb, 2 long middle fingers, 2 short outer fingers, and 3 smaller suction cup-like holes on their palms. Their eyes, which function independently, allowed them to focus on 2 different areas at once and perceive wavelengths different than humans, making visuals designated for one species difficult for others to interpret, something that became an issue in some of the Mon Cal ships. And their eyes were also used to express emotions. Staring with the left eye showed surprise, while staring with the right eye could signal either a challenge to a fight or an expression of love, depending on the context. Males had chin protrusions called barbels that grew more numerous with age, and were used to detect underwater pressure change. More recently, they've been shown being able to breathe underwater at all sorts of depths, like the Quarren, but previous details were clear that the Quarren were the deep underwater dwellers, and the Mon Cal were the land and shallow water folks. They could breathe in both environments, though they preferred to use their organic gills whenever possible. This is a really unique piece of biotechnology called the organic gill, a living, jelly-like symbiote that fit over the nose and mouth, extracting breathable oxygen directly from the ocean water. This transparent, gelatinous blob eliminated the need for bulky air tanks or traditional breathing gear, making underwater travel much easier. And you could even customize it. It could be fitted with attachments like chin protectors, goggle clamps, comlink transceivers, microphones, and earphones. And these would slide into the gill, which molded around them to keep everything secure. They would usually sell for about 200 credits and weighed just about 1/10 of a kilogram. Once equipped, the wearer could stay underwater indefinitely without worrying about drowning. And while the sensation of putting it on felt strange at first, most species quickly adjusted, making it a popular tool among tourists and explorers. Originally, it was designed for the Mon Calamari and even Quarren, but the gill is compatible with most species, except for Celestins who were allergic to it. The only catch was that the symbiote itself didn't live long. It would die in about a month. So it might be a bit confusing, but the Mon Cal could stay submerged indefinitely, but they found breathing water slightly uncomfortable, and could descend to depths of up to 30 meters without needing special equipment, and did not have to decompress when resurfacing. But going far deeper or staying underwater a lot longer was very uncomfortable and you needed this biotech aid on your face. So in moments of panic, especially for younger Mon Cal, they could drown. So at least the original Legends material is clear. The most iconic water world people in the galaxy could actually drown. Now I want to get into their history and then see their culture as it evolved after joining the greater galactic community. According to their own history, their civilization first emerged on the sacred Makbuto Islands, an ancient archipelago they considered the birthplace of their people. Their earliest ancestors were shore dwellers with a strong affinity for the water, living off a diet of crustaceans, fish, and fruit. Over time, they developed rudimentary aquaculture, farming fish and cultivating kelp, which helped sustain their growing society. Unlike the deep-dwelling Quarren, Mon Cal built their civilization in the shallow coastal waters and on the few islands of their planet, creating technologies and materials and agriculture both on land and underwater quickly gave them an early technological advantage. Though ironically, since they would become one of the galaxy's greatest shipbuilders, their technological progress was actually a lot slower compared to human civilizations and many other species, due to the lower quality of metals found in their planet's crust, which really slowed their ability to develop advanced metallurgy. Around 4500 BBY, tensions with the Quarren erupted into a devastating war. The Mon Calamari eventually won, mostly due to their superior tech, and to ensure lasting peace, they took hundreds of young Quarren as prisoners, not to punish them, but to educate them in Mon Calamari society. Once these re-educated Quarren returned to their people and took leadership roles, the plan worked and they were culturally more like Mon Calamari, and so the hostilities faded, and these two species formed a symbiotic relationship. This newfound unity sparked a golden age, during which the Mon Calamari expanded their technological capabilities and built massive floating cities that served as hubs for government, learning, and culture. Exploration had always been a deep-seated drive for the Mon Cal, and their ambitions extended beyond their ocean world. They wanted to reach out into the stars. Working alongside the Quarren, they launched a slow and methodical space expansion program, starting with orbital habitats and research stations to study zero gravity and starship propulsion. It took over a century of experimentation before they were ready to take the next step. A breakthrough came from Mon Cal mathematician Q Visa, who developed their unique cavitation hyperdrive. Though slower than the Corellian models, it was enough to push their species into interstellar travel. Between 4400 and 4200 BBY, they began colonizing new worlds, including Hinaku, Mantan, and Risto. Meanwhile, the Quarren oversaw asteroid mining operations, refining newer and better metal alloys, which all supported Mon Calamari shipyard construction. This period of expansion set the foundation for what would become Mon Calamari space. But both practical and psychological factors kept them from pushing too far beyond their home system. Though they had the means to explore the galaxy, their deep connection to the ocean and their cautious nature meant they preferred a slow and deliberate approach to interstellar expansion. They had their first encounter with the Galactic Republic in 4166 BBY, and in what we will see as classic Calamari bad timing, this would prove to be just before the Great Sith War. Republic scouts came across Mon Calamari starships near Risto, marking the first real contact between these two civilizations. The Republic had known about the DAC system through probe data, but had previously considered it too remote for serious exploration. Once communication was established, the Mon Calamari were eager to learn about the Republic and its vast knowledge of the galaxy. The Quarren, however, were more wary, urging more caution. Eventually, DAC officially joined the Galactic Senate, and in 3653 BBY, a Mon Calamari even held the position of Supreme Chancellor during the sacking of Coruscant. Many other people also joined the Republic military, fighting in the Cold War that followed the Great Galactic War. Roughly 500 years before the Battle of Naboo, a group of struggling Mon Calamari and Quarren were recruited by Hugo Barton, a man promising them a fresh start in a new city on Lamored. He lured them in with dreams of untouched oceans and a thriving new frontier. But once they arrived, they realized they had been tricked into becoming slaves. Forced to live in overcrowded, miserable conditions, tensions between the Mon Cal and Quarren boiled over, leading to violent riots. Eventually, the Quarren broke away and formed their own settlement known as the Shoals. And over these millennia is when we see the mingling of cultures, with aliens from all over the galaxy coming to appreciate aspects of these odd Outer Rim people. The Mon Cal were known for their highly advanced and refined culture, with a deep appreciation for art, music, literature, and science. Their creativity was unmatched by most species in the galaxy. One famous example of their artistic expression was the Squid Lake Ballet, a Mon Cal performance staged at the galaxy's Opera House on Coruscant in 19 BBY. The show was prestigious enough to draw in powerful figures like Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, and in literature, Mon Cal writers often described the stars as islands floating in a vast galactic sea. Personality-wise, many of them are known for being soft-spoken, gentle, and incredibly composed. They had a natural ability to control their emotions, rarely losing their temper, and were remarkably focused, able to maintain concentration without being easily distracted. Like we see in many of their engineering projects, other alien species were in basic agreement that once they set their minds to a task, Mon Cal were unwavering in their dedication, which often meant that a majority of Mon Cal spent their lives on hopeless causes. Their lives' work didn't make any success in the common sense. They didn't bring about that invention or make that new discovery, but Mon Cal knew this was the wrong way to look at it. For them, it was the only way to be. And it's that sort of culture that leads to those 1 in a million breakthroughs. Many felt the biggest breakthroughs came with their starships, as they saw each one as a work of art rather than just a tool or weapon. Their ships were uniquely designed, often more efficient than those of other species, but also far harder to construct. The Given, a species obsessed with mathematical precision, found Mon Cal ships frustratingly organic and lacking in geometric order. What's really strange is that the Mon Cal and Quarren speak the same language, which makes me think that that's the result of that war in ancient times. When the Mon Cal responded with culture warfare, it seems like they reformatted Quarren culture all the way down to its base code of language. Everyone saw them as peaceful and nice going, but they also had no patience for criminals. People often mistook their kindness for being lenient, and that was absolutely not the case. Many think they particularly hated smugglers. I think it's more a sampling error, that's just who they were coming in contact with the most, but they were known to deal out the strictest punishments of any world in the Outer Rim. And it shouldn't be that shocking that just because they're peaceful in the modern era, they obviously were excellent warriors too. They were at constant tension with the Quarren, and they had proud warrior families and traditions that spanned hundreds of years. In the final decades of the Galactic Republic, the government of Dak and its representation in the Galactic Senate were split between the Mon Cal and Quarren. And while some Mon Cal ventured into the wider galaxy, and a handful of Republican citizens visited Mon Cal space, it was still mostly isolated. Dak resisted any formal attempts to join the Republic, and because of the secrecy, its shipyards are seen as mostly legendary. Most, even in military backgrounds, had never even set eyes on them. Just before the Clone Wars, corruption seeped into the planet's leadership, with Quarren Senator TK's allowing Thalassian slavers to operate in the Calamari sector, before he defected to the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Leading to the Quarren Isolationist League, he became an enemy of the Republic after being removed from office. Meanwhile, another Mon Cal, Marai, took a more active role in the Separatist cause, leading an attack on Kamino's cloning facilities. This sparked a full-blown civil war on Dak, with the Republic-backed Mon Calamari Knights fighting alongside Republic forces against the Quarren Isolationist League. After the Republic won the Battle of Dak, new agreements were put in place to restore peace. 2 pro-Republic senators, the Quarren Tundra Dalmia and Mon Calamari Mina Tills, were selected to jointly represent Dak in the Galactic Senate, symbolizing a renewed alliance between these two species. But the conflict wasn't over yet, and at some point during the war, Count Dooku unleashed the Forced Harvester on Mon Calamari as part of the Dark Reaper crisis, devastating parts of the planet and leaving lasting scars on its people. Seizing the moment during a political crisis, the Carcharodon separatist advisor Riff Tamsin stirred up tensions between Mon Cal and Quarren again, secretly supplying separatist military aid to the Quarren chieftain No Sarai. The situation escalated when King Yos Kalina of Mon Cala died under suspicious circumstances. His son, Prince Lichar, was the next in line for the throne, but the Quarren challenged his claims, demanding a larger role in ruling Mon Cala. The Republic sent a peace delegation, including Senator Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker, but diplomatic efforts failed, and both sides braced for war. Prince Lichar and Captain Glial Akbar rallied the Mon Calamari forces, and while the Republic deployed clone scuba troopers, led by Jedi General Kit Fisto and Padawan Ahsoka Tano, they initially held back the separatist attack on Mon Cala City, but they were forced to retreat when the Quarren unleashed Hydroid Medusas, massive electrified jellyfish that devastated their ranks. With Count Dooku's orders, Riff Tamsin took over Mon Cala, rounded up the Mon Calamari people, sending them into internment camps. Prince Lichar and his surviving forces escaped to underwater caves near the city, and when an attempt to smuggle Lichar and Senator Mina Tills off-world failed, the young prince and his allies decided to continue the fight, even as the separatists enslaved the Mon Calamari population. The arrival of Gungan reinforcements from Naboo wasn't enough, and soon most of the resistance was captured, all except for Prince Lichar and Ahsoka. Determined to turn the tide, Lichar focused on rallying his captured people and convincing the Quarren to switch sides. When he was captured while trying to inspire prisoners, he managed to secure a meeting with Riff Tamsin. By this point, Tamsin had overplayed his hand, alienating the Quarren by scheming to crown himself the ruler of Mon Cala. Seeing this betrayal firsthand, No Sarai had a change of heart and ordered the Quarren to combine their forces. Together, these two species, often at their own necks, were able to come together with the Jedi, Republic, and Gungans to launch a final assault, driving the Separatists out of Mon Cala. After the battle, Lichar was crowned king, restoring a newfound peace with more equal representation of these two people, though this would be very short-lived. When the Galactic Empire first arrived in the Mon Calamari system, the people of Dak welcomed them, unaware of the Imperial leadership's true intentions. Really, the Empire just saw the Mon Cala and their resources as a tool for their war machine, treating them as natural slaves, being so far off from human. Suspicion also surrounded them because both of Dak's senators had signed the Petition of 2000, a document calling for government reform, specifically reining in the Supreme Chancellor. With the help of Quarren saboteurs like Segor Tells, the Empire swiftly took back control of Mon Cala, overpowering its defenses and seizing the planet. At first, the Mon Calamari resisted passively, refusing to accept Imperial rule. Enslaved and oppressed, they refused to abandon their fight for freedom, but Emperor Palpatine had no tolerance for defiance. In retaliation, he ordered the destruction of 3 Mon Calamari cities, killing hundreds of thousands if not millions. But rather than breaking their spirit, the attack only strengthened their resolve. Eventually, with the Mon Cal and Quarren united, they rose up against their Imperial overlords and drove them off their world. At least that's what legends say. More recent accounts tell it like this. The invasion of Mon Cala, or the subjugation of Dak in the Battle of Mon Cala, began with Farron Barr, a former Jedi Padawan, secretly advising King Lichar during his negotiations with the Galactic Empire. When Emperor Palpatine recognized Barr's Jedi influence, he sent Darth Vader, along with 3 Inquisitors and a squad of Purge troopers, and shortly after Vader's arrival, Imperial Ambassador Telvar was assassinated by Barr, prompting Governor Williff Tarkin to order a full-scale invasion from his Star Destroyer the Sovereign. In the initial battle for Dak City, Vader and his forces captured King Lichar, but before they could secure victory, a massive tsunami, caused by a school of giant sea creatures, this wiped out the Imperial forces on the surface. While Vader and his Inquisitors regrouped, Imperial Colonel Burgeon led the fight into the northern regions from an aerial landing platform. But Glial Akbar led a Mon Calamari assault on the platform, ultimately destroying it with Burgeon still aboard. Meanwhile, in the southern regions, used merchant ships from the Mon Cala mercantile fleet to create an interlinked shield network, which altogether was powerful enough to resist an Imperial attack, a tactic that even Tarkin grudgingly admired. As the battle raged, Vader and his forces tracked Barr and his disciples to Bell City, an underwater settlement. While Tarkin ordered Vader to pursue Lichar, the Inquisitors and Purge troopers cornered Barr and his last disciple. But Barr used a Jedi mind trick, turning the Purge troopers against the Inquisitors, giving his follower a chance to escape. Vader eventually captured Lichar and forced him to watch as Tarkin ordered an orbital bombardment of Mon Cala. Barr arrived in the last stand against Vader, revealing that he had intentionally provoked the war, believing it was the only way to rally the Mon Calamari against the Empire. In panic and desperation, Lichar ordered his forces to stand down, but Tarkin continued the attack anyway. Vader then killed Barr and took Lichar into custody, imprisoning him on Strokil Prime. With Mon Cala under Imperial control, the Mon Calamari staged a massive exodus, secretly launching city-sized structures into space. These refugees would go on to become a major force in the Alliance to restore the Republic, supplying capital ships that were later converted for war in the Talaris system, which formed the backbone of the Rebel fleet. This sets the legends and canon versions of events on both timelines, whether they're producing capital ships from their own shipyards over Dak, or in those secret Rebel space docks. It is the Mon Cal creations that would give the Rebels a proper fleet, and their soldiers were all described as fighting with the same unshakable resolve as Wookiees, also being excellent pilots, and the ones in leadership roles were known for being great listeners, tacticians, and just overall excellent to work with. On both timelines, we get similar results after this. Determined to erase their history, the Empire spread false information about the Mon Calamari. Obo Rin, an Imperial sentiologist working under Darth Vader, published the Catalog of Intelligent Life in the Galaxy, a guidebook which falsely claimed that the Mon Calamari had only been discovered during the reign of the Empire, To prove how powerful this propaganda was, how much could be changed over a single generation, a majority of Imperial citizens actually believed this misinformation, and it of course described them as being closer to animals. Odd fish-like beings, which might mimic some behaviors of other alien species, but at the core they were just dangerous, chaotic forces that Imperial citizens should avoid, reporting any suspicious behavior to the authorities. A major turning point came when the Rebel Alliance rescued Khalil Akbar from Grand Moff Tarkin. This happened as more and more people groups were learning to hate the Empire, and so they were snowballing more assets and gaining this new great leader. Akbar was promoted to Admiral, and the Mon Calamari fleet became a cornerstone of the Rebel Navy, finally going head-to-head with the Empire's massive warships, playing the most crucial role in the Battle of Endor, where they helped to bring down the second Death Star and killed the Emperor that saw them as mere slaves, had taken their planet, and infested the galaxy with propaganda against their species. These fish folk from the Outer Rim were now the most powerful military people in the galaxy, and they made sure to finish the fight. In 4 ABY, the Mon Calamari launched a series of aggressive campaigns against Imperial forces in the Outer Rim, eager to strike back at their longtime oppressors, gaining them victories on Emmer and Malcolm T, where they continued battling the territories controlled by warlords like Zinj and Teradok. But this offensive momentum came to a stop when the Empire launched a major assault on the Hast shipyards. Realizing the need to shift priorities, they redirected their efforts toward protecting the New Republic government. Eventually, the Empire was completely destroyed, and Mon Mothma wanted to repeat the mistakes of the Old Republic when they also felt they had defeated the Sith and returned to demilitarization. But the Mon Calamari refused to return to their former pacifism. They believed the only way to stop evil was to make sure that the good people were more powerful. They continued supplying ships, personnel, and resources, effectively being the military for the New Republic, even when Mon Mothma didn't want one. Though sadly, this did just make them the prime target, especially since so many other people and governments across the galaxy were unwilling to take up this mantle. Their homeworld came under direct attack in 10 ABY during Emperor Palpatine's return and the rise of the Dark Empire. As punishment for their unwavering support of the Rebel Alliance, the Empire deployed world devastators, massive war machines that obliterated many of the Mon Calamari's floating cities. But the Mon Calamari and New Republic forces fought back, successfully repelling the invasion in the First Battle of Dak. Later, Admiral Dalla launched another assault on Mon Calamari, but once again their defenses held firm. Their resilience was tested once more during the Yuzon Vong invasion, when Dak temporarily became the capital of the newly formed Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, following the fall of Coruscant. So this fringe world actually became the capital of the galaxy. By the end of the Sith Imperial War, the Mon Calamari had lost their once equal status under the One Sith. Despite this, they remained defiant, secretly aiding Alliance Admiral Gar Stasi by supplying recruits, equipment, and other medical supplies, seeing this new threat as exactly what they were warning everybody against for decades. And this form wasn't even that far off from the original Empire. History was repeating itself, and the Mon Calamari hoped to repeat their victories. When Stasi stole the Imperius-class Star Destroyer, Darth Krayt lashed out in fury, taking his revenge on the entire Mon Calamari population. To set an example for the galaxy, and knowing how these people led to Darth Sidious's downfall, Krayt ordered the immediate execution of 10% of the Mon Calamari people, and sent the rest into brutal work camps. To kick off this movement to make these people extinct, it began with the massacre of the Mon Calamari Council. But again, rather than breaking their spirit, the oppression led to the formation of the Mon Calamari Rangers, a resistance group determined to fight back. Their fierce resistance and continued support for the Galactic Alliance Remnant Fleet only enraged the Sith further. In response, Darth Warlock issued the final protocol, the complete extermination of all life on Dak. Sith scientist Vol Ison deployed viral spores, which spread rapidly, wiping out every living creature on the planet within a week. These seas, which gave rise to more diverse, sentient species than perhaps any other world in the galaxy, were now completely devoid of all life. From Whalodon to Mon Calamari, Quarren, to the smallest fish. When Admiral Stasi learned of this horrifying fate, he ordered the evacuation of Dak, launching a massive rescue operation. This involved an armada made up of the Galactic Alliance Remnant Fleet, Ronfel's Empire, and the remnants of the New Jedi Order, and countless civilian ships that volunteered to help. Knowing that Dak was home to multiple sentient species, including the Whalodons and Mawapa, the Galactic Alliance dispatched YZ-3000 tankers to save as many as possible. But a group of Quarren delegates, furious that saving these other species would mean some space wasn't being used for Quarren, and so some would be left behind, they demanded that Quarren survivors take precedence. But still bitter over the Quarren's historical alliance with the Scythe, Stasi refused their demands outright. He only allowed 1 out of every 10 ships to focus on rescuing Quarren survivors. As the evacuating ships came under heavy Sith attack, the operations tried to continue, and against the odds, the mission was widely successful, with 20% of Dak's population escaping the doomed planet. The survivors were relocated across the galaxy with the help of the new Jedi Order, ensuring that the Mon Calamari and the legacy of Dak would survive. After the 1 Sith were defeated and forced back into hiding, power shifted to the newly established Galactic Federation Triumvirate, a coalition between the Fel Empire, the Jedi Order, and the Galactic Alliance, which eventually took control of Coruscant. In 138 ABY, a large group of Mon Calamari and Quarren were lured back to Dak under the false promise that the planet was being restored. But instead they were enslaved by a pirate syndicate led by the rogue Sith Darth Luft, who forced them to build a fleet of warships. To ensure compliance, the pirates held their children and elderly relatives hostage, while brutally mistreating and beating the enslaved workers. During their captivity, a Mon Calamari environmental engineer named Aunt Lewin bonded with a Quarren named Tikin, and when they met Imperial Knight Chow Assam and junk dealer Anaya Solo, the 2 outsiders quickly realized the horror of the situation and sent word to the Triumvirate authorities on Coruscant, exposing the pirates' slaving operations. But before help could arrive, Darth Luft murdered Tikin, sparking an uprising among the Mon Calamari and Quarren slaves. This rebellion coincided with an assault by the Galactic Triumvirate, led by Admiral Stasi and the Imperial Knight Yalta Val. The combined attack overwhelmed the pirates, freeing the captives, and Darth Luft himself was slain in a duel with Chow Assam. With Dak still uninhabitable, the freed Mon Calamari and Quarren relocated to a space station, which Admiral Stasi had flooded with water to create a livable environment for them. As a sign of reconciliation between the 2 species, Lewin adopted Tikin's orphan son, Tillin, ensuring that their bond endured beyond the tragedy that they had suffered, and it would be the final chapter we know of these 2 war-torn people from Dak who were often fighting each other, but always came together to defend their watery homeworld. With many of the people from these 2 groups being pulled by the strings of their governments, many Mon Calamari and Quarren came to love each other. And we can only imagine that the lessons of history, with never-ending attacks by the Sith, ultimately destroying that homeworld, we can hope that these 2 people would come together, using their engineering expertise, with a galaxy-spanning fleet strong enough to make sure that the good guys stayed in power. Well, that's it for the story of the Mon Calamari. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, it really does help me out. But most important of all, remember, Mon Mothma is a fool in both Legends and canon, while the Mon Cals are the clear-thinking heroes no matter what timeline you're on. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video will pull from every resource available to do a complete breakdown of the MC30C. It's presumably at least one of 3 in the MC80 line, but this is the only one we're aware of, and it starts off the glorious list of MC ships from our favorite fish folks, with 15 models in total, some being among the most famous ships in the galaxy. It was considered a specialized high-speed attack frigate, and one of the most powerful mid-level frigates to ever see combat. And though we don't get any specific stats on speed like megalight, acceleration, or atmospheric speed, this may sound crazy, but I think it's at least around 1200 kilometers per hour, which would be tied with a TIE fighter, as some resources have the Nebulon B escort frigate hitting that speed in atmosphere. And this would make sense for it being called the high-speed attack frigate, because at first I was thinking maybe it was around 1000 kilometers per hour, but that would only just barely be quicker than the ISD, and wouldn't really warrant this special reputation. It's gotta be around 1200, so have fun picturing this thing zipping around like a TIE. This combined with the armament is what made it so special, with 2 forward-mounted heavy proton torpedo launchers, 16 turret-mounted medium turbolasers, 16 twin medium laser cannons, and 6 cluster bomb launchers. I've talked about why the ISD didn't want to necessarily disintegrate their opponents, mostly because capturing people and comms intact is more valuable for an empire. But there were no torpedo launchers on the ISD, and even the Venator at wartime had 4 normal proton torpedo tubes in total. So the actual explosive payload that could be delivered is far greater on this much smaller ship. The 16 turbolasers and medium lasers are incredible as well. Probably no point defense because this thing was built for hit and run and is faster than most bombers, most starfighters in general actually. and while the 6 cluster bomb launchers allow it to simultaneously play a protective anti-starfighter role, either creating a wall or lane for itself to get through the battle and hit the target, or protecting other ships in the fleet. It's a really useful weapon, and it's sadly very rare. And they are perfectly distributed around the ship, with everything being split equally across the port, starboard, bow, and aft, giving the cluster bomb launcher the ability to fire at pursuing craft. Again, everything's just synergized for that hit and run role. All of this packed into the size of only 380 meters or 1,246 feet, making it about twice the length of a Walmart Supercenter, more than 3 Y-wings longer than the Nebulon B, and almost exactly a third of the Venator. The Class 1 hyperdrive matches its reputation for quick speed, and is the fastest you get without custom ships like Slave 1 and the Falcon. While all this only required a crew of 820, while transporting 95 soldiers, and storage for 2 years worth of consumables, which is a lot of walk jerk. Now the major drawback is that it had exceptionally light armor, and some are confused by the remark by the New Republic pilot Captain Nanth Tanzit, who claimed that they could duke it out with Star Destroyers, but this is likely due to its speed and ability to take out some of the ISD's own weapons, with the MC30's powerful barrages, but also the state-of-the-art Mon Calamari defense shield, which probably works something like the MC80s that had triple layer shields, where the whole idea is that if this outer layer was defeated, the second layer would hold off the attack long enough for that outermost layer to regenerate. If this was disabled abruptly by the sheer volume of fire or specialized ion weaponry, then it was turned into space debris in just a few seconds. This is why they all operated on a tight timeline for attack runs, or when in transit they were always part of a larger fleet, and used the cluster bombs to break contact and ensure that they were never taking too much fire at once. When their fleet was in space combat, it would use its turbolasers from long range before closing into medium range to unleash its proton torpedo launchers. And while this strategy carried risks, it would reinforce its forward shields to guard against counterattacks, simultaneously deploying cluster bombs and targeting starfighters with precise bursts from its laser cannons. When faced with bomber threats, the frigate adopted a defensive approach, maintaining balanced shield coverage over the entirety of the ship, and using coordinated laser fire in groups of 3 to 5 to effectively neutralize the attackers. Now all of this only cost 9,500,000 credits, which scales with most other frigates, but for all this weaponry, speed, and shields, it's a great deal, and it's about 1/5 the cost of a Venator. Following the invasion of Mon Cala and the escape of the Mon Calamari Exodus fleet, additional city ships from Mon Cala managed to flee during the aftermath of the initial assault. Among these were several MC-30C frigates, which were retrofitted for combat and integrated into the Alliance to restore the Republic's naval forces. These frigates became a core component of the central fleets used by the Alliance in its struggle against the Empire. And during the Battle of Zorn, 2 of them played a pivotal role as part of the Allied Armada. This occurred in the later stages of the Galactic Civil War, and pitted an Imperial naval task force against an Allied coalition comprising Rebel Alliance forces, Old Mandalorians, and residents of Foundry 4. As reinforcements, the Allied Armada had 2 MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruisers, at least 1 MC30C frigate, a GR-75 medium transport, 5 other starships, and 6 fighter wings. And with all this firepower, they were able to secure a victory at Zorn. We don't get much details on them escorting this Pelta class, and one of them was attacked by Onyx Squadron and their TIE defenders. The 30C would remain a component of the New Republic's fleet during the ongoing conflicts after the Battle of Endor. At least one of them took part in the Battle of Jakku, which can be seen as the final engagement of the Galactic Civil War, and the official end of the Empire. Assign a specific role, likely that of a sort of capital ship assassin, or maybe if you're using the cluster bombs to clear out starfighters, as there were always seemingly endless waves of TIEs. It was engulfed in serpent-like blue flames as swarms of TIE fighters darted around its hull above Jakku's surface. Alphabet Squadron's Captain Nanth Tanzit witnessed those flames, but was unaware of the MC-30C's exact mission. He speculated that the reactor core had been compromised, and moments later the frigate erupted in a brilliant explosion, shining like a supernova and releasing a massive shockwave that churned the waves of fiery gas throughout the battlefield. TIE fighters in the vicinity rode the shockwave and redirected their focus to engage Tanzit and his forces. It's a really cool example of the lore of the weaker hull playing out in a narrative just how the obscure lore described. But despite the loss of this frigate, the Battle of Jakku was a decisive New Republic victory, culminating in the Empire's surrender and the signing of the Galactic Concordance. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, it made its first appearance in Star Wars canon through the 2016 supplement book Friends Like These for the Star Wars role-playing game. But it was just the image of the ship. It would only be officially named in 2020 in Starships and Speeders, though it originates from concept art from Joe Johnston for the Mon Calamari Rebel Cruiser, drawn up for Return of the Jedi. and those designs would eventually be used in the 1997 game Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, and gets officially named in Forces of Corruption, the expansion for Empire at War, released in 2006. It's just fascinating that such an obscure ship had such an impact. In 2023, Benjamin Last confirmed that the MC30C frigate in its concept art influenced the design of the Defender-class cruiser, which was seen in the live-action Ahsoka show. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions or future video. Comment your thoughts and suggestions. Subscribe to see more and check out these videos. I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, you can't go wrong with a Mon Cal ship, and the Force will be with you. Always. You can always count on the Fishfolk engineers. What's up, meta nerds? This video is going to be a complete breakdown of the obscure but incredible MC40A light cruiser. We'll cover all of its stats, do some comparisons, and learn its history. So let's dive in. It was manufactured by Mon Calamari shipyards, the same creator of all the Mon Cala ships with the MC title, but also things like the Viscount and starfighters like the Amphisub. At a length of 600 meters or 1,969 feet, it was the same size as an Interdictor-class cruiser, and about half the size of a Venator. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be nearly twice the length of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, or twice the height of the Eiffel Tower. Its armament was impressive, with 14 turret-mounted medium turbolasers, 7 on each side, 2 forward-mounted concussion missile launchers, with a total payload of 50 missiles on board. The medium ion cannons numbered 18, with 4 on each side and 5 each at the forward and aft. And finally 6 heavy tractor beam projectors, 2 on each side, and then 1 forward and 1 in the aft. This is a great combination of weaponry, and I really like how it's specialized for their naval tactics, not just purely offense. It has more ion cannons than turbolasers, and went with the heavy tractor beam projectors. Both decisions are incredibly rare on any capital ship, and show that the captain would likely open up with volleys of ion cannon, disabling the enemy ship's engines and shields, use those heavy tractor beams to push around or lock in place Imperial ships that might be more than twice its size, all while blasting away with the turbolasers until the enemy was finally in position to be completely destroyed by those concussion missiles. Its portside hangar also had room for a squadron of starfighters, which usually meant 12 units, and as we can see, it would often employ Y-wings. This too is a great pairing, releasing those bombers after your ion cannons took out the enemy shields. All this makes for a really nasty surprise for any Imperial that might overlook this simple seeming craft. And we can't ignore its speed. In hyperspace, it was faster than an Imperial Star Destroyer, with a Class 1 hyperdrive and backup Class 15. That means a ship like this could be across the galaxy with the speed of top starfighters. And its megalight speed, or how fast it travels through space, was faster than the MC80, but still slower than most Imperial craft. To compensate for this, they had those beautiful Mon Calamari made shield generators, which are able to absorb incredible amounts of turbolaser fire, something that would screw up the tactics and timing relied on by Imperial captains, giving this relatively obscure ship an element of surprise, as its focus on those tractor beams, ions, and missiles, with this effectively larger HP, allowed it to really cause some havoc in Imperial fleets. It did take an enormous crew of 3,770, but this doesn't include a battalion of 650 soldiers. It also had consumables on board to last all of these people 2 years, and would only cost 15.5 million credits. That's about 1/10 the cost of an ISD, and about 1/7 the MC80. So really a lot of bang for your buck. Or calamari flan, whatever you're paying with. As for its history, these ships would escape Mon Cala after the Imperial invasion, being a part of what is called the Mon Calamari Exodus fleet. Shipyards would be set up in space, and we see the rebellion took full advantage of all of this ship's features. The MC40A would often act as the anchor of smaller rebel attacks on larger Imperial fleets. Its shield allowed it to act like a blockade buster in some locations, and there are specific reports of how it would use those tractor beams to lock an enemy in place and then maneuver towards their aft, away from all those powerful forward-facing guns, and lay those rockets into the area just forward of the engine arrays on Star Destroyers, the area containing the main reactor, among many other crucial ship functions. It also served with Rebel Special Operations groups, its beefy shields absorbing and drawing the most Imperial fire, while the hangar could be outfitted with different craft to best serve the mission purpose. Basically, it would move your enemy into a better spot with the tractors, throw the whole enemy crew into chaos as the ion charges made all their systems go haywire, perfect for setting them up for infiltration and extraction by Rebel Spec Ops. This combo wasn't restricted to just ship-to-ship missions, but all those traits were used by Rebels to attack space stations and even planetary targets, with those ion cannons being able to knock out some city-sized shield generators. Well, its Class 1 hyperdrive meant that at a moment's notice, it could quickly respond to new Rebel intelligence reports. Things like the transport of some VIP or window to attack, and then be on the other side of the galaxy with the same speed as a starfighter through hyperspace. But it was also used to protect the Rebellion's crucial assets and VIPs. If somehow the MC40A was the recipient of an ambush by Imperial Spec Ops, the shield, tractor, ion combo worked to break away from the combat and make some distance, maybe use the ion bolts to knock out the Imp's hold on you, and safely make your way through hyperspace to fight another day. It is said to have been used up past the Battle of Hoth and Endor, even fighting off the Yuuzhan Vong. So I hope you can see why I think it's a shame that we see so little of this ship, but at least we see that it retained all of its awesomeness in canon. Maybe you'll see it in some future show, but right now it's only appeared in canon in the books Starships and Speeders, and that's where a lot of these stats were retained, being previously laid out in the book Strongholds of Resistance, and making appearances in the Star Wars X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, as well as the comic Legacy War Issue 5. The only thing that really changed was that in Legends its shields were relatively normal, a 1696 SBD rating, which is on par with something this size. But in canon, while not given a number, it states that it had exceptionally strong deflector shields, which allowed it to slug it out with much larger ships. So that's it for the MC40A light cruiser. Be sure to comment your thoughts on this ship. Do you think it fits a good role, or would you just go with some of the larger MC ships? But most important of all, remember, Mon Cala engineering plus Rebel hit-and-run tactics are the stuff Imperial nightmares are made of. And the Force will be with you, always.
This is Admiral Radish of the Rebel Alliance. All squadron leaders report in.
What's up, men and nerds? In this video, we'll pull from every resource to understand all 4 variants of what is one of the most impressive ships in the MC series. You'll see why the MC75 Star Cruiser earned its price tag of 88 million credits, which is more than half an ISD and 1.5 times the Venator. Its length of 1,204.44 meters, or 3,951 feet and 7 inches. Yes, this is one of those rare times where we get such specific details. It makes it about 2 Falcons longer than the Venator, and about 75% of the ISD, while its height of 435.56 meters, or 1,429 feet, is about the same as 19 AT-ATs, or nearly twice the height of the Venator. It seems like the original atmospheric speed was 650 kilometers per hour, or 403 miles per hour. But that is half the Nebulon B frigate and about 65% of the ISD in Venator. Though with its refits, it gets equipped with 12 Kuat drive yards Guimond 15 sublight ion drives. These sublight engines were housed beneath the engineering section, concealed within the heat-dissipating structure of the ship's design, and modified to enable the massive ship to maintain a cruising speed comparable to that of its starfighter escorts, which should be around 1,000 kilometers per hour. And so on par with the Star Destroyers. The reason behind these refits starts in 18 BBY, when the Galactic Empire seized control of the oceanic planet Mon Cala. The native Mon Calamari initiated a large-scale exodus, departing their homeworld aboard many of their vast city ships. Among these, the MC75 became the first of their city ships to be retrofitted for military purposes. Originally, they served as passenger liners, civilian transports, and civic government buildings. One notable example, the Profundity, originally functioned as the Civic Governance Tower in Nystillum, before being repurposed as a warship by the Rebellion in their deep space facilities. These conversions marked a turning point as the MC-75s are part of the first wave of vessels to flee Mon Cala, with additional waves of starships escaping later. And that Star Cruiser name comes from the original civilian role, which is true of most of the MC series. During the war, they became the first true command ships of the Alliance fleet. But with only a limited number in service at any given time, these vessels were frequently assigned to the command of Alliance admirals. Rarely operating independently, they were typically accompanied by a fleet of a dozen or more support ships. In combat, they equipped long-range tactics, using their turbolasers in coordinated groups of 2 to 3 to engage enemy warships. When the situation demanded, they could maneuver between ships to deliver devastating broadsides. For engagements requiring greater firepower, they closed to medium range to deploy their ion cannons. Crews were tasked with dynamically adjusting the ship's shield coverage to reinforce whatever side faced the heaviest fire. Against smaller warships and starfighters, the MC-75s relied on their laser cannons and torpedoes, also fired in coordinated groups of 2 or 3. That crew's size was 3,225, which is less than half the Venator, while also having the space to move 1,000 passengers or ground troops, while having 2 years' worth of consumables for all those people if need be, which would be about 25,000 packs of Rhodian ramen for literally 3 square meals a day. Its Class 1 hyperdrive made it faster than most of the other Rebel and Imperial ships, but was normal for the fish folk and seen in some Republic capital ships. This upgrade transformed the cruiser into a battleship-class vessel, complete with a weapon collar designed to house primary weapons and shield generators. Enhanced shielding was installed on both the fore and aft sections of the superstructure, with the heavily armored forward hull making its concealed deflector shield generators largely redundant. But a deflector shield emitter array was added at the aft for additional protection. And of course, it had an impressive arsenal, with 20 point defense laser cannons, 12 broadside turbo lasers, 4 heavy ion cannons, 12 proton torpedo launchers, and 6 tractor beam projectors hidden within a port located forward of the weapons collar. This formidable array of weaponry enabled the MC-75 to effectively engage the larger warships of the Imperial Navy. Heavy ion cannons are rare on their own, and when combined with 12 proton torpedoes, that is 3 times more than the Venator, and none were found on the ISD, it all makes for a perfect combo to take out shields as quick as possible and deliver the greatest amount of damage before those shields were restored. While the tractor beams mean you could easily capture a target, as you don't have to completely unload your arsenal on the ion-disabled enemy, but use some torpedoes to destroy the engines, shield generators, or ship reactor, and then open up comms to encourage the enemy to make the smart choice and surrender. An armored outrigger fin on the ventral hull housed the command bridge pod and receiver array, positioned opposite a dorsal mast equipped with a communications transmission system and sensor cluster. These blade-like fins, along with the vessel's sleek, tapered profile, were deliberately designed to evoke the primal fear of a predatory fish among the aquatic Mon Calamari. While just behind that ventral outrigger fin was an ordnance pod. The city ship's former civic atrium was repurposed into a docking bay and starship service area. The ship was managed by a hangar traffic control suite, protected by overlapping shields and magnetic containment fields, ensuring proper regulation of oxygen and pressure. And the docking bay was large enough to accommodate vessels up to corvette size, making it a versatile hub for starship operations, which normally included 36 starfighters, which were mission-specific and changed frequently, but would see everything from B and U wings to the A, X, and Y trio, while this space could also be attached to large corvettes like the CR-90. The Ordnance version is basically the same, but with an exponential increase in the total number of proton torpedoes on board, dedicated to causing as much damage as possible, and like a massive gunboat, delivering more torpedoes per minute than several fleets of Venators could accomplish. And while I focused on the hit-and-run aspects of the MC-30, although this 75 is not described that way, the fact that it could keep up with starfighter escorts, had a Class 1 hyperdrive, and this insane payload dump, I think this variant could be seen in a similar role, and of course pairing them all would be incredible. Snowballing this effect with precision strike craft stored in the hangar, with one of the Rebel fighters and bombers' ship advantages being that they all had hyperdrives, unlike most TIEs. And thus they could break off and escape into the blue void and then regroup if things went sideways, and you didn't necessarily have to make it back to the mothership for a successful hit and run. Of course, the supply chain issues of being Rebels would limit the use of this strategy, but just the possibility of this happening had to ruin the sleep of many an Imperial. While the armored cruiser is a bit straightforward, just thicker hull plating throughout. In the MC-30 vid, I also mentioned that once its shields were down, even basic weaponry would Swiss cheese through it effortlessly. But this beefy, up-armored MC-75 made it so that even if those glorious Mon Cala shields somehow went down, it would still be able to battle on for a while without much worry. By 2 BBY, after Phoenix Cell secured a Quasar-Fire-class cruiser, the Talaris Rebel Stardocks transitioned into war production. These facilities began refitting the MC-75, starting with the Profundity, along with the MC80 Home One type heavy star cruisers Home One and Nautilin. Colonel Ange Zavor documented the operations at the shipyards in the Talaris Cometry Cloud in a report to Commander-in-Chief Mon Mothma, which was later included in the Rebel files. By 1 BBY, the Profundity had become one of the Alliance fleet's first fully battle-ready capital ships. It served as the flagship of Admiral Radis, the former mayor of Nystillum, as well as the flagship of the entire Alliance fleet. When Rogue One disobeyed Alliance High Command and infiltrated Scarif to retrieve the Death Star plans, the Rebel Alliance ultimately decided to deploy its fleet in support, leading to the pivotal Battle of Scarif in the Galactic Civil War. Admiral Radis commanded the Alliance forces from the bridge of the Profundity and successfully received a transmission containing the stolen plans from the surface of Scarif.
Transmission received.
Admiral, we have the plans! She did it!
But before the Profundity and its remaining Alliance ships could retreat, the Death Star and the Imperial flagship Devastator arrived. The ensuing conflict saw several Alliance ships destroyed, and the Profundity sustained heavy damage, rendering it incapable of escape. Imperial forces, led by Darth Vader, boarded the Profundity, resulting in the death of Admiral Radis and the massacre of the Rebel crew. Despite this, the Death Star plans were successfully transferred to the Tantive 4, which was docked in the hangar and managed to escape the battle. Following the loss of Admiral Raddus in the Profundity, Admiral Glial Akbar assumed command of the remaining Alliance fleet elements, those which had not been deployed to Scarif. And in the lead up to the Battle of Yavin, he submitted a report to Mon Mothma detailing the defense of Yavin 4 and the grave threats posed by Imperial actions. In this report, Akbar acknowledges the profound loss of the Profundity, but affirmed that the fight continued with the Home One taking its place as the Alliance's flagship. That report too was included in the Rebel files. By this time, several additional MC-75 Star Cruisers had completed their retrofits and were deployed to support various Alliance operations. Following the mutiny of the Mon Cala mercantile fleet, at least 5 MC-75 Star Cruisers were stationed at the Mako Ta space docks, and they were involved in several skirmishes over the following months, with the MC-75 Aspiration receiving acclaim for its role in a battle where it inflicted significant damage on an Imperial Victory-class Star Destroyer. On the same day as the monumental Battle of Endor, the Temperance and Accordance participated in a conflict in the Hosnian system. Here, an Imperial armada attempted to strike at the core worlds. The battle concluded with an Alliance victory, though the Accordance was destroyed, but the Temperance managed to rescue its surviving crew. Following the Battle of Endor, the Alliance transitioned into the New Republic, and the MC-75 remained a key component of the New Republic defense fleet. Among them was that ship, the Temperance, assigned to New Republic General Hera Syndulla, after the destruction of her previous flagship, the Acclamator-class assault ship Lodestar, which was lost during the Cerberon system campaign. The Temperance played a crucial role in the Trioth operation, delivering bombardments on the Scar of Trioth. And around this time, the ship also served as the headquarters for Vanguard Squadron, tasked with defending the New Republic's Project Starhawk in the Bormia sector, which was the most unique vessel produced by the New Republic. In 34 ABY, after the Resistance recovered the Rebel files, both Akbar and Ushos annotated Zavor's original report to Mon Mothma regarding the Talaris Rebel Stardocks and the status of the Profundity. By 35 ABY, with the return of Darth Sidious, the Resistance joined forces with Lando Calrissian to lead a massive fleet. This fleet included dozens of MC-75 Star Cruisers and their sub-variants, including the B and C, participating in the climactic Battle of Exegol above the Sith world. After their victory, the celebrations commenced on Agent Kloss, with at least one MC-75 Star Cruiser seeing the ultimate victory out. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, supposedly there were 16,000 ship models used for the Galaxy fleet at the end of the sequel trilogy, and this resulted in countless variants of the ship, as they mashed up 3D model ship details. As much as that whole series was lackluster, and there is a lot of magic lost in not using real ship models in general, there's something to the fact that ending the series in this digital kit bashing of ships, when physical kit bashes, or the combining of parts from model kits to make something new, was such a big part of the very first Star Wars ships and the entire original trilogy, to see that done even if digitally, there is something cool about that. If you want to read up more on the ship yourself, check out Rogue One, The Ultimate Visual Guide, of course the Rebel Files, and the Encyclopedia on Starfighters and Other Vehicles. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment your thoughts and suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, some fish get even more deadly when you take them out of water, and the Force will be with you. Always.
It's a trap!
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the MC80 Home One type Star Cruiser. We'll be mentioning the actual Home One, but also, and this is somewhat confusing, but focusing on the actual line that it inspired. The MC80 Home One type Star Cruiser, produced by Mon Calamari shipyards, was part of the MC80 Star Cruiser line, which has a ton of different other options. Originally built for deep space exploration, each Mon Calamari vessel was unique in design and construction. These ships were later standardized during the conversion to warships through extensive refitting and hull modifications. The standard length for most ships was 1,200 meters, though some individual ships, like the Home One type Star Cruiser, measuring up to 1,400 meters or longer, while the Home One itself was 1,300 meters, putting them around the size of the Venator and smaller than an ISD. Featuring cylindrical hulls with tapered bows, midship hangar bays, and bulbous sterns fitted with 10 large sublight engines, consisting of 4 M8 Star Drive main engines and 6 M4.5 Star Drive maneuvering engines, giving it a megalight rating of 60, which is half an A-wing and 1.5 times the enormous Executor class. The Home One type, known for its heavy cruiser classification, was among the largest capital ships in the Rebel fleet at the time of the Battle of Endor. The ships were built with extensive shielding via the Serage Seal shielding system, and heavy hull armor compared to that of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Home One and its sister ships were pivotal as command ships and battleships, leading the Alliance fleet and being true capital ships within the Rebellion. A full Home One type crew consisted of 5,402 personnel, including 78 gunners, with an additional complement of 1,200 troops. The very minimum amount of crew required was 1,230, which applied to both Home One and smaller ships like the Independence. Cargo capacity was substantial at 20,000 tons, and the ship could support up to 2 years' worth of consumables. The hangar capacity varied among ships, with Home One being capable of carrying up to 120 starfighters, including A-Wings, B-Wings, X-Wings, and Y-Wings. And some ships, like the Independence, were equipped with fewer starfighters. Though with the nature of Rebellion, the hangar facilities often included shuttles, landing craft, gunboats, assault craft, planetary vehicles, and personal carriers, often of the galaxy's most scruffy nerf herders. It was usually a pretty diverse mix in these hangars. Armament was robust, featuring 29 or up to 36 twin or quad heavy turbolaser batteries, 36 heavy twin ion cannon batteries, 80 quad laser cannon batteries, and 6 heavy tractor beam projectors. Unlike the Executor class, the Home One did not have a dedicated point defense laser system, as its turbolasers were said to be capable of effectively targeting and destroying even small craft, while still being powerful enough to be used for planetary bombardments, though admittedly this was rare. The ships featured advanced sensor and navigation systems, including long-range sensors and a navigation computer. The hyperdrive was powered by the Triluna 400 MGS system, with a primary Class 1 rating and a backup Class 9 system, enabling reliable deep space travel at a speed quicker than just about every Imperial ship out there. The bridge design retained Mon Calamari specific control systems with command stations made for Mon Calamari officers, although there is evidence of one ship that was modified to accommodate a human command crew, and the bridge contained a CS Mark 12 holo projector table in the center of a briefing room, which was used to monitor the battle in real time. The commanding officer's chair was attached to a swiveling robotic arm overlooking the crew in a panoramic space view. As we talk about in all these ship breakdowns, commanders really like to get their organic eyes on the situation. Multiple command pods were located on both the dorsal and ventral sides of the ship's hull, which ended up being iconic of the Mon Calamari look. Now, the Home One type ships, including their flagship, would not be available to sail to your average citizen, but they did start off serving roles as passenger liners, then later exploration vessels, then battleships, command ships, and carriers. Their significance as premier vessels was established by 20 BBY, which was during the Clone Wars, aligning with the shipyard's continuing reputation for constructing some of the galaxy's most formidable star cruisers, while their rivals, the Quarren, were off making the capital ships for the CIS. Now, most of the stats are the same for the original ship called the Home One that inspired this line, and so it makes sense to look at this cross-section, and though maybe not every single detail is exactly the same in the broader MC80 line, honestly most of what's going on inside is probably very similar across all the different ships. The ship featured 2 sections that could detach from the main body and operate as independent attack or escape vessels if needed, and since the command crew was exclusively Mon Calamari, this drove everything from the ship controls to even having water-filled passages, allowing the crew to move swiftly by swimming through the ship. Over time, these aquatic pathways were removed to make the ship more accessible to other species serving aboard. But despite these changes, the ship retained its distinct Mon Calamari touch. So originally, many of these tubes throughout the ship would allow it to be navigated like a big water park, and like the tube system we see on Mon Cala during the Clone Wars, making it probably the quickest intra-ship transit of any capital ship out there. But moving to the rear, we see the relatively large hyperdrive generator and field emitter, which really end up proving what an engineering marvel the Venator was, as it's one of the only other capital ship-sized craft moving with a Class 1. This leads up to the main reactor and the ion engines themselves. These smaller pods on the outside are other escape craft, but there are also these large bulbous sections, which are shown to be actually craft that can break away. This is an ingenious system that if you have the engineering skills that the fishfolk were known for, you would be confident to pull it off. Instead of having an enormous hangar section, this craft can act like a land invasion force. In peacetime, it was just to move this small cruise ship-sized craft down to places like Coruscant, being packed full of dignitaries and merchants, with the entire underside being full of cargo modules. Why have valuable laser cannons and ordnance sitting inside when it could act like another turbolaser battery or turret? And then of course this and the smaller version up towards the bow each have their own smaller escape pods as well. So the main ship can release dozens of escape craft, while still having a conventional hangar with other craft. Then these whole vessels break away with their own bunch of escape craft on them. It must have been overwhelming for imps trying to shoot it down and decide what to focus on, as there could be a good argument that the VIP was on any of these. There would be a ton of escape craft, so pure odds might save the VIP, but the best shielding was on the main ship. But then maybe that was too obvious and they were on a secondary ship. Maybe a shuttle breaks away, only for an escape pod to travel back to the main ship just in time for a hyperspace jump. It's one of the most interesting and unique features of the Home One that we sadly never see play out in any media. Other things to note are that instead of the forest of antennas on top like most craft, all the sensors and comms are packed into the nose, which shows their confidence in that shielding system, as you're facing a lot of crucial tech right toward the enemy incoming fire. And not all these pods on the outside are for escape, but some are structures that house specific tech like tractor beams, turbolasers, and we can see inside of the upper deflector shield projector array, showing how it generates out from each of these ridges, and there are said to be 3 of these, with the second being on the ventral side, closest to the enormous deflector shield generator. These 3 would, in theory, act like regenerative walls of defense. The enemy would take out the outer layer, and while it was pounding away on the second one, the first layer should be fixed and back up. The odds that the enemy would be able to overwhelm all 3 shields and then take out your engines or hyperdrive systems before you could escape was almost impossible. And though I am in general in agreement with Thrawn, being against the imp's tendency to build super weapons, but to give Palps and friends credit, it would be things like the Death Star and Eclipse Superstar Destroyer that definitely would have enough to overwhelm something like the Home One in an instant. Maybe you could think a dozen ISDs could do that as well, but there is something to having a weapon that can pop out of hyperspace and simply overwhelm even the most craftiest of shield designs. Something that can one-shot a supposedly impenetrable target, be that a triple-layered ship or even a planetary-sized shield generator. As for its history, the Home One was originally built as a civilian vessel at the Mon Calamari shipyards, like most Alliance-era Mon Calamari warships. It was designed as an unarmed exploration ship for deep space missions and for making contact with alien species. When the Mon Calamari decided to support the Alliance, Home One was converted into a warship and became Admiral Akbar's flagship after he was freed. The ship gained importance after the Alliance's defeat at the Battle of Hoth, which left them without a planetary base. Home One then served as a mobile base for the rebel leadership and became one of the most crucial assets to the rebellion under Akbar, who was now the supreme commander of the rebel fleet. At the Battle of Endor, Home One was one of the largest ships in the fleet, and Akbar led the Alliance forces from its bridge. The ship continued to play a key role, with Akbar personally commanding it in major missions.
Those fighters were a diversion. We're being boarded. Defend the primary reactor, land on the cruiser, and defend its reactor as much.
Including defending the reactor core from stormtrooper attacks, with help from X-2. For the next 5 years, Home One was the base of Rogue Squadron, and took part in battles like the Seizure of Coruscant, the Battle of Bilbringi, and the Battle of Sirtrik. Akbar often led engagements from Home One, so it needed to be kept ready at all times, and repair yards in orbit over Coruscant maintained the ship. Even though newer Mon Calamari ships like the MC80B and MC90 were introduced, and by 10 ABY Akbar commanded from the MC90 Defiance, yet even then Home One was still seeing action. It led a task force against Leona Tavera's Invid pirates in 11 BBY, alongside Rogue Squadron and 2 Victory-class Star Destroyers. Akbar continued to use Home One as his flagship until at least 23 ABY. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, there are a ton of discrepancies on ship specifics like weapons, something you'd expect since this came out more than 40 years ago. One of my favorite small details is that in the novelization of Return of the Jedi, Home One was referred to as the Headquarters Frigate, with that being in italics like it's its name, while Home One was used more like a call sign, as if there were a bunch of other homes within that unit, like the call signs within Red Squadron, like Red 6. And in Empire at War, it was twice the size of the ISD. If you do want to check out some of the resource guides for yourself, here are the most useful ones. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, maybe the Death Star wasn't so much for destroying planets, but for just sticking it to the fish folk. And the Force to be with you. Always.
That's not good.
What's up, meta nerds? After breaking down the Home One, let's get into what might be the second most popular Mon Cal creation. The MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruiser, simply known as the Liberty class cruiser, was a heavy star cruiser that typically measured 1,200 meters in length, though some ships of this line reached up to 1,500 meters, or about 3,937 feet, making the shortest ones of this line just a bit longer than the Venator, and the longest variant just a Zillo Beast plus Jawa triplets shorter than the ISD. This vessel was part of the MC80 Star Cruiser line, which included two main types. One of these was that larger one, which most of us know as the heavily armed MC80 Home One type heavy star cruiser. Mon Calamari shipyards manufactured the Liberty cruisers, which were priced at 104 million credits each, making them less than the ISD and almost 2 times the Venator. If the naming convention isn't confusing enough already, there is another similar Mon Calamari star cruiser, dubbed in canon as the Unidentified Cruiser, but in Legends it was always called the MC80A, and did resemble the Liberty but lacked the distinct port and starboard wings. And it's not just the diversity over all these different lines, but no two MC80s were alike. Each was built with a unique design tailored for its original role as a civilian transport. These ships served as long-range explorers or luxury passenger vessels, and each cruiser was carefully handcrafted by whoever commissioned it with precise specifications. These ships were long, sleek, and had an organic shape, and were able to rival the Imperial II class Star Destroyers in both length and overall mass. They were sturdy, over-engineered, and well-suited for the challenges of constant interstellar travel and combat. The Liberty class could carry enough supplies for 2 years of constant operation. Going inside, you would see water-filled corridors for the Mon Calamari crew, who would swim through the ship just like we see in their cities on Mon Cala. Though eventually these were drained and replaced with floors and ventilation systems, and thousands of the original viewports from the civilian versions were plated over in order to make sure the hull was protected. The ship's hull displays and battle graphics were made for the Mon Calamari's visual spectrum, with control stations requiring specific movements that other species could not replicate. The pale interior featured multiple passageways, a communication center, storage rooms, security areas, and airlocks. Even some of the original Liberty cruisers came with military-grade deflector shields, and of course, all retrofitted ships had deflector shield generators. They were powered by 9 M8 Star Drive engines, allowing speeds of up to 60 megalight or 975 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, putting it right there with the Venator and exactly the same as the ISD. They had a primary Class 1 hyperdrive and a secondary Class 9 hyperdrive, which made it faster than almost all Imperial capital ships, and was remarkably able to keep up with starfighters. It's very rarely seen in ships of this size, though the Great Venator was a Class 1 also. I can go on a whole tangent on how this feature allowed the Republic to secure such large areas of space from the greater number of CIS forces, but we'll get more into that in the Venator video. These ships were fitted with long-range sensors and escape pods in their civilian models, and despite their power and versatility, they were difficult to maintain due to their unique design for each vessel, which often meant that components were not interchangeable, even if you had a bunch of what were still called Liberty-type ships. This made the Rebel Alliance cautious in how and where they deployed them. Most Liberty-class ships typically had a ventral hangar bay, while some models included a port-side hangar with a hangar door. Beneath their sleek exteriors, they hid heavy weaponry in strong hulls that often took the Imperials by surprise. Standard armaments included retrofitted twin heavy turbolaser batteries, which were 48 in total, divided evenly with 12 facing forward, 12 to each side, and 12 at the aft. They were also equipped with 20 twin battleship ion cannon batteries, arranged similarly with 5 in each direction. And while these cruisers lacked point defense laser cannons, they boasted 6 heavy tractor beam projectors and missile tubes. They also carried massive ion cannons mounted along their broadside, and so when you put it all together, these are one of the few ships in the Rebel line that actually combines ion cannons, tractor beams to hold them in place, missiles which were harder for the Rebels to come across, and turbolaser batteries that were as strong as those on the ISD, all proving why the Mon Cala ships were the most important warships of the Rebel Alliance. A Liberty cruiser typically had a full wing of 3 squadrons or 36 starfighters, with 1 squadron often dedicated to reconnaissance. However, they had the capacity to carry up to 10 squadrons, totaling 72 starfighters, and their usual complement would also include shuttles, landing craft, and various utility vehicles, while supporting a passenger capacity of 1,200 soldiers. Ships with portside hangar bays featured an opening behind the hangar, housing a weapons control room with 3 large ion cannons extending beyond the hull, protected by a shield. These cannons could be vulnerable, exposing their cooling coils and causing explosive reactions if damaged. A Liberty cruiser's crew numbered 5,402, including officers, pilots, and enlisted members. Command crews were usually Mon Calamari, though refits allowed other species such as humans, Celestins, and Quarrens to serve aboard. The Starfighter wing was commanded by a wing commander, who reported to the ship's captain and the fleet's fighter command. Despite being designed with Mon Calamari in mind, over the years they had to adapt to a diverse range of crew members. As mentioned, these cruisers were originally built as civilian ships for long-range exploration, or as enormous luxury yachts, packed full of luxury quality touches like our sponsor Helix. But once refitted, they became part of the Mon Calamari planetary defense fleet, protecting the Mon Calamari system and its colonies. As more of these ships were converted, they took on the role of heavy battle cruisers for the Rebel Alliance, serving as starfighter carriers, command ships, and security cruisers for major engagements. They often maintained a fleet of support ships and functioned as mobile bases for starfighter patrols or as protection for critical Alliance assets like shipyards and command staff. When deployed in combat, a Liberty cruiser typically used a broadside attack against enemy warships. If one side of the ship faced significant threat, it could reposition its shields to defend that flank specifically. Without built-in point defense weapons, Liberty cruisers relied heavily on their starfighter squadrons to guard against bombers, patrol boats, gunships, and boarding vessels. In 2 BBY, before the formal declaration of the Rebel Alliance, Mon Calamari star cruisers underwent significant refits at the Talaris Rebel star docks. This effort aimed to transform them into proper warships following repeated evacuations from their homeworld, Mon Cala. Among these ships were the MC75 Profundity, the several MC80 Home One type heavy star cruisers, along with many others. And after the destruction of Alderaan in 0 BBY, the MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruiser Aurora became the flagship of a fleet commanded by Admiral Akbar. This fleet included 8 EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigates, 8 CR-90 corvettes, 5 GR-75 medium transports, and a mix of T-65B X-Wing starfighters, BTL A-4 Y-Wing bombers, and UT-60D U-Wing support craft from Echo Squadron. The fleet intercepted a distress call from an Alderaanian refugee convoy at the trading port Foster Haven, prompting Echo Squadron to respond. Upon arrival, they were met by an Imperial fleet led by Commodore Ray Sloan, and quickly called for reinforcements. The Aurora and its support ships soon arrived at Foster Haven and engaged the Imperial II-class Star Destroyer Vigilance. Despite the loss of one frigate, the Alliance forces successfully rescued the refugees and managed to retreat with the remaining fleet intact. During the Galactic Civil War, the Empire launched an invasion of the planet Zorn in the Pharaoh sector with a task force consisting of the Gladiator-class Star Destroyer Blood Ambition and the Raider-class corvettes Sargonton and Warhawk. In response, the Rebel Alliance sent a naval squadron called the Allied Armada, which included 2 MC-80 Liberty cruisers and several other warships. A few months after a mutiny on Mon Cala led to the escape of star cruisers from the Mon Cala mercantile fleet, at least 12 MC-80 Liberty cruisers gathered with the other newly acquired ships at the Alliance's Mako Ta space docks. The Rebel Alliance Navy had retrofitted several Mon Calamari cruisers with Shu Turun systems and assembled Alliance leaders and ambassadors for a ceremonial launch. Among the assembled ships was the Liberty itself, and in total, about 37 Mon Calamari star cruisers were present for this event. But as the ceremony began, it became clear that critical systems across the fleet were non-functional. And at that moment, Darth Vader and the Imperial Death Squadron, which included the Executor, and 3 Imperial II-class Star Destroyers emerged from hyperspace and destroyed the cruiser Yavin's Hope. Death Squadron launched a full-scale assault on the Mako Ta space docks, bombarding the defenseless Alliance warships. When the Rebel starfighters managed to take off, Death Squadron countered by releasing all their fighter wings. The MC-80 Republic was one of the first to regain functionality, using clearance codes to bring its systems online and escape. It returned to help the remaining Alliance fleet, and once the codes were distributed, several MC-80 Liberty cruisers managed to jump into hyperspace and avoid destruction. After the Battle of Hoth and 3 ABY, the Rebel Alliance Navy broke into several divisions, including the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 11th divisions. While some divisions were lost, the 4th, 7th, and 11th managed to regroup and travel to Parnesia, where they would aid the 2nd Division, which was under attack by the ISD Tarkin's Will. The combined Rebel fleet included various warships, among them at least 2 MC-80 Liberty cruisers, and 3 MC-80 Home Ones. There is the odd case of one of these Liberty cruisers facing serious issues when its systems malfunctioned, and starfighters collided in the flight deck, leading to crew injuries and hospitalizations. but it was later discovered that the cruiser had been sabotaged. While on a different mission, an MC80 Liberty cruiser led an attack on an Imperial weapons lab, showing the surprising maneuverability of this ship as it navigated a narrow path through this sector. In 4 ABY, after discovering the existence of the second Death Star at Endor, along with the Emperor's presence there, the Rebel Alliance gathered most of its navy at Sullust. Around this time, the Liberty cruiser Invincible Faith intercepted a coded message from Moff Derek Wraith, revealing that the information gained by the Bothan spies was actually a trap. In response, the Imperial Special Forces Unit Inferno Squadron infiltrated the Invisible Faith to delete the message. Commander Iden Versio allowed herself to be captured and taken aboard, while her ID-10 Seeker droid infiltrated the ship separately. The droid navigated past Alliance personnel to reach Versio, who freed herself and escaped the brig. During this, Admiral Akbar called on the Invincible Faith in order to join their assault on the Death Star.
If this proves, we will divert the Empire's attention away from Sullust. We are amassing the fleet in preparation for our attack on Endor.
Versio and her droid managed to reach the communication center, deleted the message, and triggered a general alarm. After fighting off Alliance forces, she escaped through an airlock and was retrieved by her starship, the Corvus, just as the Invincible Faith began firing its ion cannons. Once the fleet was fully assembled at Sullust and a strike team infiltrated Endor to disable the Death Star's shield generator, the Alliance fleet traveled to Endor via the Sanctuary pipeline. The fleet included several Mon Cala starcruisers, with at least 5 MC80 Liberty type heavy starcruisers among them. When it was discovered that the deflector shield was still active, General Lando Calrissian and Admiral Akbar ordered the fleet to pull back.
It's a trap!
The Imperial fleet launched its fighters, sparking intense battles around the Alliance ships. A TIE interceptor would crash into the ventral hangar of one of these cruisers, which was then soon destroyed by the Death Star's super laser, obliterating the Liberty and nearby ships. After the MC80A Nautilin met the same fate, Calrissian convinced Akbar to engage the Star Destroyers at close range, reasoning that they could take down some ships before the fleet was overwhelmed.
We'll last longer than we will against that Death Star, and we might just take a few of them with us.
The Alliance fleet pressed the attack, with Liberty cruisers engaging fire with Star Destroyers. When the ground team disabled the shield generator, fighters stormed the Death Star's interior while the fleet concentrated fire on the Executor. Though of course it would be taken out by the smallest unit in their entire fleet. After the Death Star's destruction, an MC80 Liberty cruiser descended to Endor's surface as Alliance dropships delivered reinforcements. Inferno Squadron, stationed near the ruined shield generator, did manage to escape and reach orbit, where 2 MC80 Liberty cruisers navigated through the Death Star's wreckage, toward a third cruiser battling the ISD Eviscerator. Inferno Squadron fought off rebel forces and regrouped with the Eviscerator before making their escape. Then, shortly after the Battle of Endor, a Liberty cruiser led a small fleet that included 4 CR-90 corvettes and numerous starfighters in an attack on Fondor. Their target was the Fondor shipyards and the docked Imperial Star Destroyer Dauntless. The Liberty cruiser launched 3 UT-60D U-wing support craft and fired its powerful broadside ion cannons at the Dauntless. But Inferno Squad intervened and destroyed the transports. Acting on Moff Wraith's orders, Iden Versio boarded the cruiser, sabotaging it from within. This damage caused one of the CR-90s to crash into the cruiser, and the Dauntless broke free of the shipyard and unleashed its firepower on the cruiser, resulting in a dazzling explosion and Imperial victory. After a raid on the Wretch of Tehran, the Alliance uncovered details of Operation Cinder, part of the Emperor's posthumous contingency plan aimed at devastating Imperial worlds. And determined to save as many as they could, the Alliance prepared to act, and during a skirmish on Vardos, Versio and Del Meeko surrendered to the Alliance and were taken aboard the Liberty cruiser Restoration. And it was in the hangar bay that General Lando Calrissian convinced them to join the mission to stop Operation Cinder on Naboo. The Alliance fleet, including Danger Squadron, the Restoration, and the Melcrawler II, were able to work with the local Naboo forces in order to secure a victory. When the alliance to restore the Republic became the New Republic, many of these ships continued their service in the New Republic Defense Force. One Liberty cruiser played a key role in the Battle of Var-Shah, fighting alongside an MC-75 starcruiser and an MC-95E starcruiser, along with supporting frigates and corvettes. The combined fleet successfully destroyed the Var-Shah dockyard and an Imperial Star Destroyer, forcing the ISD Overseer and surviving Imperial fighters to retreat. As the Empire broke into various factions like the Imperial Royalist Coalition, the Yomo Council, and the Chattawan government, Consular Gallius Rex, the de facto Imperial leader, gathered most of the Imperial military on the planet Jakku for a final stand against the New Republic. After the New Republic Senate approved intervention, the NR Defense Force was mobilized for battle. Liberty cruisers and other Republic ships emerged from hyperspace and launched an attack on Imperial forces in Jakku's orbit, beginning the Battle of Jakku. While Liberty cruisers and other warships engaged the Imperial flagship, the Executor-class Ravager and its support fleet, some New Republic ships broke through to fight in Jakku's atmosphere. The cruisers exchanged broadsides with ISDs, leading to heavy losses on both sides. Starfighters and bombers clashed throughout, while New Republic ground forces landed to engage Imperial strongholds and rescue downed allies. The battle saw many Liberty cruisers and Star Destroyers destroyed, with massive hull fragments crashing to the deserts below. Some, like Freedom's Dawn, fell intact to the surface, and despite heavy damage, other Liberty cruisers continued to fight, even under assault from TIE bombers. Iden Versio would play a key role in destroying the Eviscerator's fighters and bombers, while the capital ship was being bombarded by another Liberty. After the New Republic victory, the Galactic Concordance was signed by Grand Vizier Mas Amedda, officially ending the Galactic Civil War. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, it first appeared in Return of the Jedi, where ILM crafted a detailed miniature model for the Liberty cruiser, along with the MC80 Home One type. But most of the differences are really just adding wings onto the existing Mon Calamari Star Cruiser model, meant to make this final battle show the diversity of the Rebel fleet. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out all these resources used. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, never underestimate the fish folk, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? Continuing with the Mon Calamari ship breakdowns, let's get into the MC80A, a formidable variant in the MC80 line, which was importantly produced by Mon Calamari shipyards after they gained freedom from Imperial control in 1 BBY. Unlike earlier MC80 versions that were repurposed from exploration ships or luxury liners, essentially space cruise ships, that were then weaponized for the Rebel Alliance, the MC80A was purpose-built for war, making it leaner and more powerful than its predecessors. Measuring 1,200 meters or 0.75 miles in length, it was about 5 ARC-170s longer than the Venator, and about a C-9979 less than an Imperial Star Destroyer. There is no official price, but it was probably close to the Liberty type, which was $104K, again right in between the Venator and ISD. It had a crew of 5,402 and space for an additional 1,200 troops, while being armed with 48 Tamanback XV9 turbolaser batteries, controlled by a Platt-Droma targeting computer, which is a bit of a surprising drop-off in weaponry. The turbolasers are as powerful as those found on the ISD and these other Mon Calamari behemoths, but it seems to lack the ion weaponry and torpedoes, which were put to excellent use by the Liberty. Though like its sister ships, it did have a great complement. Its 3 fighter bays housed 6 starfighter squadrons, 3 composed of BTL Y-Wing starfighters, 1 with A-Wing interceptors, and 2 with X-Wing starfighters. It featured a Sirage seal shielding system, which was powered by a Triluna 400 MGS star drive and hyperdrive system, allowing it to reach a top sublight speed of 60 megalights, and likely had that same 975 km per hour top speed in atmosphere. Propulsion came from 10 clustered engine thrusters at the ventral stern of the rounded, oddly oblong hull. The gray exterior was marked by pods and bulges, with a single elevated pod situated midship or further back on some of the ships, and the hull overall with its scalloped organic design would evoke an appearance of a ray, as Mon Calamari aesthetics often mimic nature, which was just a smart way to make sure that they were able to operate underwater, which was their primary role before operating in space. We don't get any confirmation if these pods come off like they do in the Home One, which was exceptional for its whole breakaway larger ships and tons of smaller escape pods. It really could just be that they were like some of these other pods, which were filled with ship assets like turbolaser batteries or shield generators. By 4 ABY leading up to the Battle of Endor, the MC80A Star Cruiser had become an integral part of the Rebel Alliance fleet, actively serving for nearly 5 years at this point in the Galactic Civil War. Following the daring rescue of General Han Solo on Tatooine, a fleet of Alliance starships, including these A's, would gather near Sullust, and Rebel leaders assembled aboard the flagship Home One to devise their plan to attack the Empire's second Death Star. We can see one of these A's as it was near the Home One as the fleet prepared for their hyperspace jump to Endor, and at least 10 MC80A cruisers took part in the ensuing battle, which, though an Imperial trap, turned out to be the greatest victory for the Alliance. Of all those ships, at least 6 survived the fierce battle. The A's would continue their service into the Rebel Alliance as it evolved into the New Republic, and one specific cruiser, the Naurutus, was sent to the Outer Rim territories for anti-piracy missions. Under the command of Mon Calamari Captain Jenkol, the Naurutus succeeded in dismantling the pirate group known as the Quimian Survivors. By the time of the Corellian Crisis in 18 ABY, the Naurutus, considered aging by retired Vice Admiral Kursk Malia, remained one of the New Republic's few operational capital ships. And while on patrol duty in the Coruscant system, it used a tractor beam to seize an unidentified ex-TIE fighter. The pilot, undercover intelligence agent Belindi Kalinda, was brought aboard and later handed over to Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, revealing a plot to trigger a supernova in the Thantra Zilbar star. The Naurutus led an evacuation force to the Thantra Zilba system, striving to rescue as many inhabitants as possible before the star's destruction by the ancient Center Point Station superweapon, activated by the Sicorian Triad. Luckily, it was still in service in the New Republic fleet during the Yuuzhan Vong War, where at least one would play a critical role in intercepting a Yuuzhan Vong escape pod carrying Jedi apprentice Jason Solo over the Calamari shipyards, putting a perfect, poetic end to the ship that served freedom. In the original Mon Calamari that broke away, overthrew the Empire, maintained peace, and eventually fought off the Vong. That's it for its breakdown. It's a bit shorter, but it's one of these classic ships that we're always seeing and just never understand exactly what makes it different. And as for behind the scenes facts, this wingless sort of Liberty class first made its appearance in Return of the Jedi, though it was not named at the time. ILM model artists aimed to expand the Rebels' fleet visual variety, and so they modified the original wingless model into the Liberty type by adding wings and swapping out one engine for a pod. The name MC80A Star Cruiser was first introduced in West End Games' 1990 The Rebel Alliance sourcebook, while many earlier references just kinda gave a vague MC80 to all of these different ships, which we now know as the Home One, the Liberty, and the MC80A. Specifically, it was used interchangeably in the Thrawn Trilogy sourcebook, and continued over a bunch of video games like the X-Wing games. And one kind of frustratingly lore-breaking point is that in the 1996 Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels and the official Star Wars fact file, as well as the 2012 Essential Guide to Warfare, all point out that this is a more stronger version of the MC80A Star Cruiser, which would be the Home One line. So I would expect it to have the heavy twin ion cannon batteries, which were 36 in number, 80 quad laser cannons, maybe even some missile and torpedo tubes, since the Home One type Star Cruiser only had 29 to 36 heavy turbolaser batteries. And so the A version is jumping that up to 48, but it'd be odd to say that it's more powerful overall if it lost all the ion weapons, laser cannons, and explosive munition options. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, Fishfolk engineering is simply unmatched, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, meta nerds? Continuing with the greatness of the MC80 line, we're going to cover the more obscure evacuation cruiser. It was a modified version of the standard MC80 Star Cruiser, produced by Mon Calamari shipyards and adapted by the technicians to serve as an evacuation transport rather than a warship. This cruiser measured 1,200 meters in length, or 3/4 of a mile, making it 75% the length of an ISD, and at the shorter limit of the MC80 line, which had types that could range up to 1,500 meters, just short of an ISD. And unlike its armed counterpart, it had all the shielding and weaponry removed to maximize space and efficiency. The evacuation cruiser had a megalight speed of 60 and a maximum atmospheric speed of 600 km per hour, or only 373 miles per hour, making it one of the slowest ships out there, but still faster than the original civilian Gazanti, which was made slow in hopes of dissuading pirates from attacking them. And despite removing so much, it's also the slowest in the MC80 line, which for something that's trying to prioritize getting people safely away from something, seems like a very strange stat. Its hyperdrive is also slow, rated at a Class 4 for primary use and a Class 14 as a backup. They're clearly not worried about getting anywhere fast, but like the name suggests, maybe they were just trying to pump out a whole bunch of these as cheap as possible, and just having a hyperdrive meant that you could get away. Once you were in the blue void of hyperspace, you were safe. Navigation systems would make sure they get to wherever they wanted to be, and though the interior of the ship is not exactly the same, the inside would look something close to this cross-section from the Home One. And one funny thing to think about is that if this evacuation model also had breakaway ships and escape pods like these blisters along the surface. I kinda doubt it, because again, you're just trying to get everyone into that blue void. If they were in a situation that was so bad that they would need breakaway ships, they would likely just get shot down anyways. With a crew of 1,011 and a minimum operating requirement of 429, the cruiser could also carry between 75,000 and 150,000 passengers, making it essential for large-scale evacuations. It had a cargo capacity of 16,000 tons, which was said to be enough to sustain its occupants with consumables for up to 6 weeks. All of that is truly incredible. If you go halfway and say that on average they had 113,000 passengers, that's more than twice the total crew and passengers of the ISD, which was overpacked to begin with. And you can imagine it was cramped, but who cares when your planet was being turned into lava? The fact that so many people could be fed means that for all we know, these blisters along the surface are filled with canned dewback meat and Ewok flavored ramen to feed all these refugees. Now, there isn't much on its history. Even though this ship is a great idea, and you would expect to see tons of similar ships like this in a galaxy that has had non-stop warfare for 35,000 years at least, but it's oddly one of the few examples that we have of just a pure, dedicated evacuation ship. Simple, cheap engines and a hyperdrive, and an interior completely dedicated to beds and food storage. It was introduced during the Battle of Calamari in 10 ABY, that's 6 years after the Battle of Endor, and it played a vital role in the New Republic's efforts to safeguard large populations during crises. Its role as an evacuation transport highlighted its value in humanitarian and strategic missions where rapid, mass evacuations were needed. As the Imperial assault on Mon Cala raged on, Mon Cal technicians worked tirelessly to convert MC80 star cruisers into these dedicated evacuation transports, likely taking what would have been warships and just moving in tons of supplies instead of adding all that weaponry. And they were able to achieve an impressive rate of over 1 conversion per day. And they were prepared to carry the entire planet's population to safety from the relentless onslaught of the world devastators. Although the evacuation ultimately proved unnecessary, countless Mon Calamari boarded the cruisers and fled, seeking refuge from the chaos of the battle. So that's it for this obscure ship breakdown. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like it. Once you realize you can travel off-world, realize aliens can invade, and make sure to prioritize evacuation ships just in case. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, meta nerds? This complete breakdown of the MC80 Star Cruiser will pull from every resource available, including one of the best cross-sections of a Mon Cal creation that we have ever seen. And by the end, we'll completely understand this post-Endor ship. With the fall of the Empire, the Alliance to restore the Republic did just that, and after capturing Coruscant, the New Republic was formed. Now, most of the galaxy did not have a clear distinction between Clone War and Galactic Civil War. To most people out there, it was just nearly 3 decades of constant warfare under different names. Which is why the Mon Calamari were so shocked with Mon Mothma, no relation. She felt that evil itself had been defeated, and repeating the worst mistake in history with the Ruusan reformations, just like when the Old Republic felt that evil itself was now gone with the destruction of the Sith Empire. Now that Sith Lord Sidious was dead-ish, she wanted to dissolve the New Republic military. Luckily, many of these MC85 were already commissioned by then, but either way, the Mon Cala monarchy had no intention of giving up their ability to defend themselves. The glorious shipyards would hit their peak in both original and new canon timelines, eventually coming to encircle the entire planet. The MC85 would become the mainline warship to protect the noble fish folks, and we'll see why it's very impressive in a lot of ways, but there are some very strange mistakes here. At a length of 3,437.37 meters, or 11,281 feet, it was more than twice the length of the ISD, and even with the cylindrical design, it was only around 280 meters thinner than the ISD, about the difference of a Lancer and a TIE fighter, while its height of 461.61 meters, or 1,515 feet, would make it just a Wookiee couple and a Jawa taller than the ISD. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be more than 10 times the largest warship in the world, the Gerald R. Ford nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, or 4 times the Burj Khalifa. Now we should work through this cross-section starting at the rear with the 11 sublight ion engines that produce a megalight rating, or the speed in space, said to be greater than 130, which would make it on par with the Resurgent class Star Destroyer. And faster than almost everything. Seriously, everything from the TIE Defender to even the newer RZ-2A wing, even the First Order TIE FO. The only things faster than this are the TIE VN and TIE SF. We get a great shot at the reactor, which is essentially just a supersized version of what powers everything from the Star Cruisers down to TIE Fighters, engines that take a gas, ionize it, and shoot it out the back in order to create thrust. And having 11 of these means it would have great maneuverability, and we get this great look at the thrust vectoring, and it's all covered in layers of armored cowling. The hyperdrive generator is just in front of this array, and it's actually a pair, something I don't think I've seen in any other ship. And I'd say it's pretty important, with hyperdrive damage going down in the history books for being the first domino to fall in a process that would eventually destroy the Sith. Many ships have a backup hyperdrive, but the way this is explained, and just the visuals, really seem to be saying that this is a backup of the actual likely Class 1 hyperdrive. It has 2 Class 1s. So likely in this post-war era, hunting down Imperial remnants and all sorts of crime lords, they wanted to make sure that they could make it back to support any other fleet anywhere in the galaxy, having redundancy for such a crucial system. And within this bubble blister is the deflector shield generator. And we even get the micro emitters identified. These would be all along the surface of the ship, taking the ability to focus the shield power in certain directions, made famous with the X-Wing.
Put your deflectors on double front.
And it's on just about every ship, but with these micro emitters it would be more precise control than ever. Though we should think that the shields of this latter era, with far more ability to produce things as great as the engineers could imagine. I mean, you're not the underdogs building these illegally in secret anymore, like in the time of the Empire. They had more resources than ever, and could build openly, but while that makes sense, there is not enough detail to say it is better than the Liberty, and I'd still say it doesn't come close to the Imperious.
They can't lose us, but they can keep at a range where our cannons are ineffective against their shields.
Of course, we saw it taking numerous hits for a very long time, but this would have likely been true for many other Mon Cal creations as well. We get a great look at the Shield Operations Center being located deep in the main body of the ship, not in some blister on the surface or bridge that sticks out. On the ventral side, we see more antennas. These are for targeting and long-range sensor arrays, while this is the short-range comms, with the turbolaser targeting array that is housed in this pod. Right in front of that is one of the turbolaser cannon blisters. Many of these blisters are serving specialized roles, like deflector shield projectors, and this one is a tractor beam emitter, while the entire nose section is filled with more sensor arrays. And for going on offense, we see the sensor jamming and stealth systems, which I think is a great addition to a Star Cruiser. There's a really neat feature with this ventral bridge complex tucked up under the nose area, with the main bridge being up top. Not as exposed as the Kuat creations like the ISD and Venator, but there are these panoramic windows, and the entire bridge is very clean and spacious with panels for all the different specialists. Knowing what happens to this bridge is pretty ironic, given that it's one of the better integrated bridges in other Star Wars ships. What seems a bit risky is the enormous fuel tank storage. It looks like Zillo Beast could swim around in there. All that fuel is up front. People were mad at the fuel plotline with this ship. I made a bunch of videos on how all ships in Star Wars have always used fuel. It's in A New Hope and expanded all throughout all the decades since. You can still think it's a dumb or boring plotline, but not lore breaking or anything like that. But funny enough, after all the outrage, there is still a fuel aspect of the ship that doesn't make sense. You can't have so much existing lore on having weapons, shields, armor, etc., all built around the idea that firing forward and receiving most of your attacks head on is normal. Then make sure to put your enormous fuel tank up front. Most real-world planes, from fighter jets to airliners, store fuel in the wings or try to be central in the main fuselage because this weight distribution helps with balance. Traveling through atmospheres is a major part of their job. It's why we're almost always given an atmospheric speed detail. And it's also weird to make a whole plot point around the lack of fuel when this is one of the only ships supporting this sort of hybrid system with the ion scoop particle collector. This must mean that it's able to take in ionized gas and transform that into ship energy. So of course, out of universe, they wrote the movie script first and then the cross-section as an afterthought. But how funny that even these little details show a lack of coherent vision. So I guess after all the hoopla, I even have a niche fuel complaint about the MC85. I kinda like the ion scoop idea, and there are also these atmospheric ducts that take in the air in whatever environment it finds itself in, and runs it through this atmospheric processing plant, sorting the different gases and allowing them to refill on whatever breathable gas the crew needs, with that crew being a very diverse array of species at this time in the Calamari builds. Some of the original Calamari creations were filled with water since it was just for them, and this allowed for all sorts of useful things, like you don't need to walk on the floor, you can swim up to all sides of the room. Like a zero-G environment for humans, there's no real difference in being sideways or upside down. So while that is not how these later ships work since they have crews with all sorts of non-aquatic species, they do retain the amazing high-speed travel network of water-filled pipes that run throughout the ship, just like what we saw with their cities, allowing them to shoot around like they're in pneumatic bank tubes. There are several crew decks across the ship, with a large portion on the ventral side toward the bow, and then above the atmospheric processors and water tubes, while the VIP quarters are above the bridge, usually the most important staff and commander, all accommodating a minimal crew of around 1,139, which is just under the MC80, and it likely had a near double of the potential passengers or troop capacity, so around 2,400. and there was a great detail of an onboard droid repair bay, which makes a lot of sense when droids play such a crucial role to ship repair. Combine that with your 2 hyperdrives, and all you have to do is make sure you don't run around on E, and this thing should run worry-free. We don't get a cargo capacity number, but if it was around double the MC80, then it would be around 40,000 tons, all stored in these 60 modular storage containers. And lastly, we have the main hangar bay, which would be mirrored on both sides, with this unique hangar access tunnel, which was intended to allow a queue to build, so you can open up all these panels and take on more ships than the hangar itself can hold, for when they need to quickly get in and be transported through hyperspace, or when vehicles are being refueled and restocked with torpedoes. The queue for all these ships can form here. The total complement's a bit strange because it's just listing what was currently on board, so keep in mind that the MC80 Home One could carry from 36 to 120 starfighters. So with this being 3 times the size, the configuration of fighters, bombers, and interceptors could have been substantial. But when we see it, there are at least 4 SF-17 heavy bombers, a resistance transport pod, 30 U-55 orbital load lifters, 4 RZ-2 A-wings, and 7 T-70 X-wings. And the total armament was 18 heavy torpedoes, 18 heavy ion cannons, 12 point defense laser cannons, 6 proton torpedo launchers, and multiple tractor beam projectors. And none of that made any sense, with it only being a quarter of the guns on the Home One, which was in service around 30 years before this and built when it was illegal to do so and with far less resources. There's really no justifying any of that. As for history, we only know of those few fateful days with the Raddus, the flagship of the Resistance Navy, used during the evacuation of Dakar. Kybo Ren would use that unique hangar queue lane during his run, firing torpedoes right into the hangar before moving to the bridge. While he did not fire on his mother, the TIE SF, which had the qualitative upgrade over the Imperial TIEs by having torpedoes, they did fire and took out the bridge. And the Raddus was of course destroyed during the hyperspace ram into the Supremacy. I covered this pretty quickly at the time, but this was a way smaller channel. But I noticed that in the cross section it showed, and really the whole point of being tracked through hyperspace was focused on, based on this new device which worked by having a chamber that was constantly in hyperspace. So there was a part of the ship that's in hyperspace at all times. So when the Raddus goes through light speed, it crashes into this, and the impact is combining this acceleration with being ripped back into real space like we see with the interdictors. While most ships would have passed through, like a sheet of paper on a table, on 2 different dimensional planes, with the tracker and the Supremacy there was this contact point. With that impact, this flagship experiences one of the most visually stunning and crucial self-sacrifices in history, though many other MC-80 starcruisers would be part of the 16,000 ship Galaxy fleet that came to the rescue during the Battle of Exegol. And like with the MC-95, there were a ton of different variants that we can see. So that's it for the breakdown. The only real behind the scenes fact is if you want to pick up that, it comes from The Last Jedi, incredible cross sections. I don't know if it's in the updated complete cross sections book. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. If you want, for just $1 a month, members get access to early videos, subscribe so you don't miss anything, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, I won't be counting this ship dud against the Mon Cala record, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, meta nerds? This complete breakdown of the MC90 will pull from every source available to completely understand how it worked and its history. After the MC series, from the MC30 to the MC80 variants, including the command ship Home One, all proved just how great the fishfolk Mon Calamari were at engineering, these vessels being mostly refits of civilian ships, some that were just civic buildings in their underwater cities. The fact that the Mon Cala fleet played such a huge role in toppling the massive machine that was the Empire is one of the greatest underdog stories in the galaxy far, far away, and of course culminated in the victory at Endor. When Coruscant was captured, the New Republic was now the governing body, and they set to work in creating their new line of ships, and the MC90 was approved just 6 months after the Battle of Endor. But the NR was still fighting Imperial remnant forces, and just working to make sure the galaxy didn't descend into anarchy and chaos with petty thugs moving in on systems. So this new ship line was shelved for a while, as NR forces tried to maintain order. But just the approval of this plan and the move to their own distinct uniform military force marks the start of a movement that would culminate in the New Class program. Since the rebels were taking every ship that would join them, these ragtag forces had just about every kind of vessel you could think of, in every shape or size imaginable, which robbed them of the economies of scale of being able to produce standardized parts and units for a coherent, planned out fleet. One funny aspect often overlooked is that you might have a hangar full of mechanics that have no idea how to repair or service this new starfighter model that just floated in. 5 mechanics might be experts in 5 different ships, but not the 6th Mystery Edition. Of course, the same goes for pilots, and even commanders, who would be able to plan a better attack if they fully understood and had a long training history with each of their units. The confusion of the ragtag rebel forces had to be replaced with a standardized military, just like in the days of the Republic. The primary objective of the New Republic's New Class program was to design and construct starships that offered greater standardization in both internal components, such as command consoles, and external features, like their hull panels. The early phase of this initiative resulted in the development of vessels that were essentially upgrades of existing, widely used designs. These included the Corona-class frigate, Belarus-class medium cruiser, and the Republic-class Star Destroyer. And one of the key ships to emerge from this phase was the MC80 Star Cruiser, with the first ship, Defiance, completed shortly before the Battle of Mon Calamari in 10 ABY. This marked the first Mon Calamari built warship for the Republic, all created through this standardized design process. That program also led to the development of 2 reconnaissance vessels, the droid-controlled Ferret class and the larger crewed Prowler class. An interesting combination of the wisdom from the CIS military, but also recognizing that some assets should be crewed by organics. As the new ships were introduced, the New Republic began phasing out the older starships, particularly those that had been converted from civilian or commercial use. The designs of the new class ships were influenced by Bevel Lamelisk's analysis of the captured worldcraft. And although the MC90 would inspire this movement, the first true new class vessel was the Sachin-class light escort. Following its success, the Republic Engineering Corporation, which led the engineering efforts of the program, decided to use the same engines, systems, keel, and hull to construct the Hagen-class fleet tender. This approach of using a base design to create multiple ship types became the foundation of the new class program. Ultimately, the program settled on 4 base designs with keel lengths of 190 meters, 375 meters, 700 meters, and 1040 meters, named after the first of each design. The 5th battle group was the first to consist entirely of new class vessels. Under the command of General Ethan Abbott, the group showcased their versatility and strength of the new class during the New Republic's engagements with the Yaveltha. And the new class modernization program was completed around 20 ABY, 16 years after Endor. By this time, the MC90 had become one of the most formidable warships in the New Republic Defense Fleet, frequently serving as the flagships for fleets and task force. It was deemed a heavy star cruiser and cost 131,800,000 credits, which is still less than an Imperial Star Destroyer, which might say more about the excessive waste in the overly bureaucratic and corrupt intersection of Kuat Driveyard boardrooms and Imperial overseers. Its length of 1,255 meters, or 0.78 miles, made it about a DP-20 gunship longer than the Venator, and about 78% of the ISD. Its hyperdrive was a Class 1, making it of the fastest ships in the galaxy without being a custom modded ship, and it is nice to see them keeping this Mon Cala aspect, as the Class 2 was more normal for capital ships, especially after the Clone Wars, but the fish folk swam against the norm and most of theirs had Class 1. It is said to have a main reactor that is 20% more than the ISD, peaking above 9.28 times 10 to the 24th watts, and its main shield and backup shields are simply described as increased, which I guess should be expected with being more than a decade newer than the shield gods of the MC80s. And if you think that is incredible, just look at the armament, and I really appreciate how specific the details are on the placement and the crew required to operate each of these guns. Normally the details here are kind of vague. With the MC90, we know that the ship is equipped with heavy turbo laser batteries totaling 75 in number, and these are distributed with a firing arc of 30 front, 15 each to the left, right, and rear, while a crew of 3 is required to operate each of them. And the atmospheric range of these turbo lasers is 150 kilometers, or about 93 miles. Then we have the heavy ion cannon batteries, with a total of 30 to 35 units. The firing arc for these is 10 front, 8 to 10 each at the left and right, and 4 to 5 rear, while these cannons require a crew of 7, and their atmospheric range is 100 kilometers, or 62 miles, while boasting 6 heavy proton torpedoes/missile tubes with a forward fire arc, each tube holding 16 missiles, and the crew required for operation is 15, while the atmospheric range for these torpedoes is 6 kilometers, or just under 4 miles. The ISD had no torpedoes, the Venator only had 4 tubes, no heavy torpedoes, but others in the MC line like the MC30 had them. These weapons work perfectly with the heavy ion cannons, which lower the shields as quickly as possible, while the heavy torpedoes inflict the most damage as quick as possible. Now the total crew is 5,860 with those 605 gunners, though it could operate with a minimum crew of 1,350 and transport another 1,700 soldiers, which is all comparable with the Venator. Its cargo capacity of 30,000 metric tons is also about average, equal to around 50,000 dewbacks. These thoroughly impressive warships remained the height of Mon Calamari shipbuilding until the arrival of the Mediator-class battle cruiser. Older ships like the Galactic Voyager were kept in reserve and upgraded during Yuzon Vong War, but by then they functioned more as symbolic assets rather than active heavy warships. And even though newer Mon Calamari built warships, like the simply named Mon Calamari Heavy Cruiser and the Mediator, dominated the Galactic Alliance Defense Forces by 40 ABY, the MC80 was still regarded as a powerful frontline combat vessel. And this was shown when the Galactic Voyager was used as the flagship of Alliance Supreme Commander Cha Neathal. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, it made its first appearance in Dark Empire 2, way back in 1992. With those really specific details coming from the Jedi Academy sourcebook, Dark Empire sourcebook, the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, and Starships of the Galaxy. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, comment your thoughts, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, if you can blend the positives of a droid fleet, Imperial scale, and Mon Cala craftsmanship, your empire might really reign for 1,000 years. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? Doing this for the completionist in me, and I'm sure some of you real Mon Cala fans will still find it interesting. Sadly, there aren't many details on the MC95. Just put up the MC90 and we learned how it was the catalyst for the new class modernization program, which sought to make a new standardized ship series that tried to combine the best aspects of the CIS's fleet using droid brains and crew to automate the process, with the Empire's modular parts and similar ship structures to take full advantages of the economies at the scale of a galaxy-spanning military. That was true in the original canon, or Legends, though it doesn't really clash with what we see in Ahsoka, as the project wasn't completed until 20 ABY, as late as 8 years after the show takes place. So when we see the MC95, it is in 34 and 35 ABY, during the fight with the First Order. You gotta love that the centralized democracy was being protected in the largest part by the Mon Cala fleets, and the MC95 is said to be in service of the Mon Calamari monarchy. Though being sympathetic to the resistance movement, many would come under the leadership of General Leia Organa. Now for specifics, we do get that it is larger than a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer, which would make it the biggest MC line ship by far. As most were maxing out around 1,500 meters, the Resurgent is nearly twice that at 2,915.81 meters, or 1.8 miles, so this would be the largest jump we see in any MC creation, and is on par with the Viscount-class Star Defender, which was 3,000 kilometers. It is really poetic that they go from converting their civic centers, literally buildings, into warships, pull off an underdog win, and don't make the foolish mistake of the New Republic, but take their military very seriously, and vowed that no foreign power would ever show up and bully them again. Something about Mon Cal commanders and ships bigger than Star Destroyers just sits right with me, though I'm sure they were very annoyed that they had to rescue the Republic again. You get your iconic blister pods, which could house everything from weapon systems to shield projectors, and I would think that, like with the Home One, many of these could break away as complete ships and smaller escape pods. We are told its hangars are only these two up front, but given its much larger size, I'm sure it could handle a whole mini fleet, not clamped on like the CR90 and the MC75, but maybe even inside as it's only 150 meters long. And things like the U-Wing alone were 24 meters and very comfortable in the MC75's hangar. And we get 5 sub-variants. Now, the out-of-universe explanation is that for the 16,000 ships created for the final battle on Exegol, to do this they did a digital kit bash, combining parts of all sorts of models, so some look a bit silly. The A is good, just feels like a Home One and Liberty. The B has these strange fins, but you could think of it all powering some specialized super heavy turbo lasers or ion cannons, like the sniping comparison I made with the Munificent. But these wings towards the front hangars drive me nuts. Imagine the issues you would have trying to get in there. I get that they could act like a barrier, a way to shield the hangar, but it's not worth it. There's a reason we don't see this on other more thought out ships. The C is growing on me, no real complaints, and it hits one of the most important parts of a Mon Cal ship. Not the logical design or stats, but simply that it evokes the watery world of its creators. As one commenter pointed out on the MC75 vid, the fact that it evokes a fish or marine creature is part of why this new canon creation is so loved by fans. And it is a bit on the nares, but it does clearly look like a fish, and is like the MC140 Scythe, which I'll be covering next. The D, on the other hand, looks like Mon Cala Shipyards was using 3D printers to build them, and the file got hacked or 4 different ships are being built here at once. It fails to have the bridge tower aesthetic done so well with the Quarren builds for the CIS, and you get this wannabe Liberty wing with an odd C9979 sticking out over here, while still having the normal MC bridge up front, and hangars that would incur more pilot deaths than the worst TIE fighter squadron being almost as forward as possible. And the E slips past critique simply by being boring. Sadly, it does make it a very reasonable ship. You get the odd hangars too, but the large antenna array up top and the big pods on each side make me think that this was more like a recon or support craft that is not supposed to be in combat, and the crew could escape and slip through hyperspace with these pods if they were discovered deep in enemy territory. So if you learned anything or thought this was interesting, please leave a like, subscribe to see more, members get early access to videos, and check out these recommendations, I'm sure you'll like them. The only behind the scenes fact is that the MC95 plays a big role in the actually pretty fun Rise of Resistance ride. But most important of all, remember, there's always a bigger fish ship, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown will be of the MC140 Scythe, one of the most controversial designs in the history of the galaxy far, far away. And it is such a strange way to finish off the glorious MC line. Since the MC30, each iteration has done something unique and excelled at the specialized role it took on. From the capital ship assassin of the MC30s to the Home One as the mobile base for the rebellion, they pushed from an Exodus fleet of repurposed underwater buildings to going toe-to-toe with Star Destroyers and becoming the best of ships out there. In canon and legends, the Mon Calamari did not fall into complacency with the rise of the New Republic. They continued to improve their military like we saw with the MC85, 90, and later 95, eventually becoming larger than the First Order capital ships. And in the original canon, the Mon Cal ships played an enormous role in defeating the Yuuzhan Vong from 25 to 29 ABY. Around 100 years later, for reasons that are still a bit mysterious, Mon Calamari shipyards decided to take the long, oval, bulbous, and iconic designs and add this thing to the same line. Now, most of the great details come from the Essential Guide to Warfare and the Legacy Era Campaign Guide. We learned that the Scythe-class battlecruiser was the backbone of the Galactic Alliance fleet, which replaced the New Republic Defense Fleet, which was itself created from the success of the MC90 generations earlier. A reorganization that was sparked by the sheer scale of destruction caused in the Yuuzhan Vong War. And the main enemy at this time is the faction known as the Fel Empire, around from 45 to 127 ABY. But the Fel also just called themselves the Galactic Empire. Like with the debated actual date of the fall of the Roman Empire, many saw themselves as continuations of it and just called themselves Romans. The Fel Empire folks saw themselves as Imperials, one unbroken line that was just suffering some major setbacks and reorganization, but never actual total defeat. The main role of this ship was to take on the Pelion-class Star Destroyer, but it was only a third of the size of the Fel creation, so at most 833 meters or about half a mile. And since the blade itself seems to be larger than the body, I'd put it at least around 1,000 just in the blade, which makes the structure between the Victory and Venator. But it was way quicker and more maneuverable than the Pelion. And a misconception I've seen in a lot of places is that all of these weapons are only in the blade section. The Essential Guide to Warfare does make it seem like that, to be fair, but there's other sources that contradict that, and this typo from the Legacy Era Campaign Guide, page 149, I think it's trying to say that it's not just in the blade. Quote, the leading edge of the blade, as well was the leading edge of the ship's main fuselage, contains densely spaced turbolaser batteries and torpedo tubes. Of course, that doesn't make sense. It shouldn't say was, but as. So the blade's edge, as well as the edge of the main body of the ship, are aligned with the weaponry. And this matches those other sources that say most, not all the weapons are in the blade section. The point of this was to create a so-called cross of fire, which again doesn't make sense if the fire is only coming from the blade part, but coming from the sides and the blade to make a cross shape. So the idea is to make a quick, agile ship with the output of a destroyer and use that speed to get in the perfect position and ideally one-shot an Imperial ship, having all the ion weapons fire, disabling the shields, and in the next fraction of a second, the turbolasers and torpedoes would rip through the hull. Not too far from the design idea of the MC30. And since we're talking space warfare, with the right calculations, you can time these volleys so that you have the deadly cross of fire barraging in waves. And we learned that most ships could not withstand this for long. One more confusion I just want to address to make sure everything's clear. The fire is still all concentrating on a single point. It's just coming from a cross-shape point of fire, but it's not landing like a big T-shape impact site. Those weapons include 3 heavy turbolaser batteries, 6 turbolaser batteries, 2 heavy ion cannon batteries, and 40 proton torpedo tubes, with 60 torpedoes in total with 2 tractor beam projectors just for good measure. This is utterly insane, with the MC75 having what was at the time an absurd 12 proton torpedo launchers. The Venator only had 4, and the ISD had none. To have 40 with more actual torpedoes on board than an entire fleet of previous generations, all following up the barrage of heavy ions and heavy turbos, focused on a single point from a maneuverable, smaller capital ship, I think that's all very impressive, and it may explain why they went with this odd blade configuration. It stands out to me that this blade is so odd, especially in the context of the MC line, to think that the fish folk have been the best engineers of this era by far. When something is so odd and obviously critiquable, then we should be humble and wonder if this ship is the only one that looks like this, and the only one with so many explosives in it. Maybe the design followed that function. Perhaps if something went wrong and there was a chain reaction, it could jettison this whole blade section and pop into hyperspace to live to fight another day. And if this was in combat, the hangars would be empty. The crew gunners are of course screwed, but that just comes with the job. And we see at the very bottom of the blade were the hangars for the 3 squadrons of CF-9 starfighters for 36 in total, as well as 4 shuttles and various assault and supply ships. And it also had docking rings for larger craft along the main body. It also had a Class 0.75 hyperdrive, which we only see in this era for ships that are not personally modded craft, with the only exception being the Acclamator with the ridiculous 0.6 class hyperdrive. Its crew was 5,200 with 1,500 troops and could move 18,000 tons of cargo, which is all on par for a ship of this size. Now, just because I explained some of the confusion and gave some reasons that might make the blade make sense, I still don't like this design. I just think it's not as silly as people are making it out to be, and I want the critique to be as accurate as possible. The whole cross of fire focusing on a single point sounds cool, but most ships do this already. A perfectly fine example of this is the very ship it was designed to destroy, the Pelion. It takes the staggered levels of the ISD to an even more extreme level. All of its guns from the sides, to especially the ones along this ridge, could be concentrated on a single point, and that has been true for most ships out there for millennia. If the fear was that having so many torpedoes on board could lead to a chain reaction, then it's weird that the MC ships are known for having these blister bubble packs and weird protrusions. You would think they could have some external structures that are separated, still staggered and spread all over so that they could focus their fire on a single point, but also with that jettison off technology, then since they would be in separate pods, you have less risk of chain reaction. All 160 torpedoes won't go off at once. And so as for its history, after the catastrophic Yuzong Vong War, the Galactic Alliance began rethinking its naval doctrine. Initially, enormous dreadnoughts like the Star Defender dominated Alliance fleets, resting on their sheer size and firepower. But the financial burden of maintaining such colossal warships eventually led to a strategic pivot. The Defense Force shifted its focus to smaller, more versatile vessels that still retained heavy armament and advanced armor. This shift birthed the Scythe-class battlecruiser, which officially entered service in 92 ABY, and came out alongside the Shawshore-class frigate and Sabertooth-class assault vessel. It also inspired the creation of the Tri-Scythe-class frigate, a smaller variant characterized by its triple-blade superstructure, which I'll be covering in the next video. And to the critique of this design, it does somewhat go against the lore because the Scythe class became the backbone of the Galactic Alliance fleet, playing a central role during the Sith Imperial War, which erupted in 127 ABY. They fought valiantly at the Battle of Kamas, one of the defining battles of this war. Despite the Alliance fleet's defeat, with their numerous Scythe-class cruisers, they were able to execute a skillful fighting retreat, preserving a significant portion of the fleet for future resistance efforts. Even after the Galactic Alliance's formal surrender, the Scythe continued to serve under the banner of the Galactic Alliance Remnant. These ships would play a pivotal role in the Battle of Dak, where Admiral Stasi's flagship, the Indomitable, was intentionally sacrificed to cripple the Mon Calamari shipyards to deny their use to the Sith Empire. In the aftermath of Dak, surviving Scythe-class cruisers continued their fight against the Sith, providing escort for the stolen Imperius-class Star Destroyer prototype, ensuring its safe passage after its capture. And some would form a key part of Admiral Stasi's joint fleet operations with Emperor Roan's Fel's forces. So the fact that they were so useful to so many different factions proved that this thing must have been very effective, not some Mon Cala mistake. As for behind-the-scenes facts, it was designed by Sean Cook, who made all the ships for the Galactic Alliance and Imperial warships. And the blade section is described as a hammerhead shape, in line with evoking the fish aesthetics of the Mon Calamari creations. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. Members get early access to videos, but most important of all, remember, just because something's ugly doesn't mean it was a mistake or that it's not useful. And the Force will be with you, always.